The Adeptus Arbites emerged from the Emperor's grand design during the Great Crusade, born from his recognition that conquest alone could not sustain a galaxy-spanning empire. As the imperial war machine carved through star systems and brought countless worlds into compliance, the master of mankind understood that military might would prove insufficient to govern the vast territories falling under imperial dominion. The scattered human colonies, each with their own customs, legal traditions, and governance structures, required a unifying force that transcended local authority and planetary boundaries. During the early decades of the 30th millennium, as the Great Crusade reached its zenith, the Emperor witnessed firsthand the challenges of governing newly compliant worlds. Local magistrates and planetary governors often struggled to comprehend imperial edicts, while their existing legal frameworks frequently conflicted with the broader needs of the growing Imperium. Corruption flourished in the gaps between planetary and imperial authority, and seditious elements exploited jurisdictional confusion to undermine imperial rule. The Emperor's vision extended beyond mere military conquest to encompass a unified legal framework that would bind every human world together under a single, immutable code of law. The genesis of what would become the Adeptus Arbites lay in the Emperor's establishment of the Lex Imperialis, a comprehensive legal codex that would serve as the supreme law across all imperial territories. This monumental work encompassed not merely criminal statutes, but the fundamental principles governing imperial citizenship, trade regulations, taxation, military service obligations, and the relationship between planetary governments and the Imperium itself. The Lex Imperialis represented the Emperor's attempt to create legal unity from the chaos of human diversity, establishing common standards that would apply equally whether on the hive worlds of the Sol system or the frontier colonies at the galaxy's edge. The enforcement of this supreme legal code demanded an organization equally unified in purpose and authority. The Emperor could not rely upon local enforcement agencies, whose loyalty remained tied to planetary hierarchies and whose understanding of imperial law often proved inadequate. Instead, he envisioned a force of law enforcers who would answer directly to Terra, trained specifically in imperial jurisprudence and equipped with the authority to override local legal traditions when they conflicted with imperial mandates. These enforcers would become the Adeptus Arbites, the living embodiment of imperial justice. The Lex Imperialis itself evolved throughout the Great Crusade as the Emperor and his advisors encountered new legal challenges across the expanding Imperium. The Codex addressed fundamental questions of imperial governance. How should trade disputes between worlds be resolved? What constituted treason against the Emperor? How should imperial tithes be calculated and collected? What punishments befitted crimes against the Imperium itself? The answers to these questions formed the backbone of a legal system designed to function across thousands of different worlds, each with their own environmental conditions, cultural backgrounds, and technological capabilities. The distinction between planetary law and imperial law became crucial to the Arbites' operational mandate. Planetary governors retained authority over local criminal matters, civil disputes, and administrative functions that affected only their own populations. Murder, theft, fraud, and similar crimes remained within the purview of local law enforcement, provided they did not involve imperial personnel, property, or interests. However, any crime that crossed planetary boundaries, involved imperial institutions, or threatened the stability of imperial rule fell under the jurisdiction of the Adeptus Arbites. This jurisdictional framework created a complex but necessary division of authority. When a planetary noble embezzled local taxes, planetary authorities handled the matter. When that same noble diverted imperial tithes or collaborated with off-world smugglers, the Arbites assumed control. Interplanetary smuggling rings, seditious cults that spread across multiple worlds, corruption within the imperial bureaucracy, and violations of imperial trade regulations all demanded the attention of officers trained in imperial law and equipped with the authority to pursue criminals across system boundaries. The Arbites' mandate extended to the enforcement of imperial edicts and decrees issued directly from Terra or through the proper imperial channels. When the administratum issued new taxation requirements, when the ecclesiarchy declared certain practices heretical, or when military commanders requisitioned resources for imperial campaigns, the Arbites ensured compliance. Their authority superseded local objections, and their presence reminded planetary governors that imperial law took precedence over local custom. The organizational structure of the Adeptus Arbites reflected the emperor's vision of centralized authority operating through decentralized execution. The organization fell under the direct authority of the Adeptus Terra, the vast bureaucratic apparatus that governed the Imperium from the imperial palace on Terra. This placement within the imperial hierarchy granted the Arbites independence from other imperial institutions, while simultaneously requiring them to cooperate with those same organizations in the execution of their duties. The relationship between the Arbites and the administratum proved particularly complex and vital to imperial governance. The administratum's endless bureaucratic machinery generated the regulations, tax assessments, resource allocations, and administrative edicts that the Arbites were charged with enforcing. Administratum adepts calculated tithe grades and identified worlds failing to meet their obligations, while Arbites marshals led enforcement actions against delinquent governors. The two organizations operated in constant coordination, with administratum data analysis identifying potential violations and Arbites investigations determining appropriate responses. Cooperation with the ecclesiarchy presented different challenges and opportunities. The imperial cult's moral authority complemented the Arbites' legal mandate, particularly in cases involving heretical practices or seditious ideologies. When the ecclesiarchy identified dangerous cults or heretical movements, the Arbites provided the legal framework and enforcement capability necessary to suppress these threats. However, tensions occasionally arose when ecclesiarchy zealotry conflicted with established legal procedures, or when religious authorities attempted to expand their influence beyond their proper sphere. The Arbites maintained professional relationships with the Imperial Guard and Navy, though their roles rarely overlapped during peacetime operations. Military forces handled external threats and large-scale conflicts, while the Arbites focused on internal security and law enforcement. However, during major investigations or enforcement actions, Arbites marshals could requisition military support, and military commanders occasionally called upon Arbites' expertise when dealing with civilian populations or legal matters in occupied territories. The independence of the Adeptus Arbites from local planetary authorities represented one of the emperor's most significant innovations in imperial governance. Unlike local law enforcement agencies, which answered to planetary governors and operated within local legal frameworks, the Arbites reported directly to Terra through the Adeptus Terra hierarchy. This independence protected them from local political pressures and corruption, while ensuring their loyalty remained focused on imperial rather than planetary interests. Arbites training emphasized this independence from the earliest stages of recruitment. Candidates underwent extensive indoctrination in imperial law, imperial history, and imperial loyalty, often spending years studying the intricacies of the Lex Imperialis before receiving their first field assignments. This education created officers who thought in terms of imperial rather than local interests, who understood the broader implications of their decisions, and who possessed the legal knowledge necessary to navigate complex jurisdictional questions. The physical presence of the Arbites reinforced their authority and independence. Their distinctive black carapace armor, adorned with imperial eagles and legal symbols, marked them as representatives of imperial rather than local authority. Their weapons and equipment bore imperial rather than planetary markings, and their fortified precincts served as visible reminders of imperial presence on every significant world. These precincts operated as extraterritorial imperial facilities, immune from local interference, and equipped with communication systems that connected directly to Terra. The Arbites' authority to investigate and prosecute crimes involving imperial personnel or property created a crucial check on potential abuse of imperial power. Corrupt imperial officials, whether administratum adepts skimming tithes or military officers selling imperial supplies, faced investigation and prosecution by an organization answerable only to Terra. This internal policing function helped maintain the integrity of imperial institutions and provided a mechanism for addressing corruption that might otherwise undermine imperial authority. The evolution of the Arbites during the Great Crusade reflected the growing complexity of imperial governance as more worlds joined the Imperium. Early Arbites units operated primarily as military police, ensuring discipline among imperial forces and maintaining order in newly conquered territories. As the Imperium stabilized and civilian governance structures developed, the Arbites' role shifted toward the enforcement of imperial law and the investigation of crimes affecting imperial interests. The challenges faced by the early Arbites shaped the organization's development and operational procedures. Investigating crimes across multiple star systems required new techniques and technologies, while prosecuting cases involving defendants from different cultural backgrounds demanded flexible approaches to imperial law. The Arbites developed standardized procedures for evidence collection, witness testimony, and legal proceedings that could function regardless of local customs or technological capabilities. The fortress precincts of the Adeptus Arbites stand as monuments to imperial authority, their imposing silhouettes dominating skylines across countless worlds throughout the galaxy. These structures represent far more than mere administrative buildings or detention facilities. They embody the Emperor's vision of unwavering law enforcement, designed to project imperial power while serving as impregnable bastions against criminal elements and seditious forces. Every fortress precinct follows architectural principles established during the Great Crusade, refined through millennia of practical experience, and adapted to local conditions while maintaining their essential character as symbols of imperial justice. The design philosophy underlying these fortress precincts draws heavily from both practical defensive requirements and psychological warfare principles. The Emperor's architects understood that law enforcement effectiveness depended not merely on the capabilities of individual arbitrators, but on the perception of imperial authority among the general population. A fortress precinct must inspire respect among law-abiding citizens, while simultaneously demonstrating to potential criminals the futility of resistance against imperial justice. This dual purpose shaped every aspect of their design, from the massive blast doors that serve as main entrances to the towering communication spires that reach toward the heavens like accusatory fingers. The exterior walls of fortress precincts typically rise between 50 and 100 meters in height, constructed from reinforced rockcrete reinforced with adamantium support structures. These walls slope inward at precise angles calculated to deflect incoming artillery fire while maximizing the effectiveness of defensive weapon emplacements. The surface treatment varies according to local conditions and available materials, but most precincts feature a dark gray or black finish that absorbs light rather than reflecting it, creating an ominous presence that seems to draw illumination from the surrounding environment. Decorative elements remain minimal and purposeful, limited primarily to imperial eagles, scales of justice, and excerpts from the Lex Imperialis carved directly into the stone. The main entrance of every fortress precinct serves as the primary interface between the Arbites and the civilian population. These entrances feature massive blast doors capable of withstanding direct hits from heavy weapons, flanked by guard towers equipped with automated weapon systems and scanning equipment. The approach to the main entrance typically involves a series of security checkpoints and barriers designed to channel visitors through controlled pathways while providing clear fields of fire for defensive positions. Above the entrance, carved in letters that can be read from several kilometers away, the phrase "Imperial Justice Never Sleeps" reminds all who approach of the eternal vigilance of the Adeptus Arbites. The internal layout of fortress precincts follows standardized patterns established by the Adeptus Munitorum and refined through centuries of operational experience. The ground level houses the primary reception areas, processing centers, and administrative offices where civilians interact with Arbites personnel. These spaces feature high ceilings and austere decoration, designed to impress upon visitors the gravity of imperial law while maintaining efficient traffic flow during periods of high activity. Reinforced transparisteel barriers separate public areas from restricted zones, while armed guards maintain constant vigilance over all civilian interactions. Detention blocks occupy substantial portions of every fortress precinct, designed to house criminals awaiting trial as well as those serving sentences for imperial crimes. These facilities incorporate the latest advances in security technology, including psi-dampening fields to prevent psychic escape attempts, automated monitoring systems that track every movement within the cells, and life support systems capable of maintaining prisoners in various atmospheric conditions. The cells themselves vary in size and configuration depending on the nature of the crimes involved, ranging from standard holding cells for minor offenders to specialized containment units designed for dangerous psychers or individuals corrupted by chaos influence. The maximum security sections of detention blocks feature cells constructed from blessed ceramite and inscribed with protective wards, designed to contain individuals whose very presence might corrupt nearby personnel. These cells include independent life support systems, multiple redundant locking mechanisms, and emergency sterilization protocols that can eliminate dangerous prisoners if containment fails. Access to maximum security areas requires authorization from senior arbitrators and involves passing through multiple security checkpoints equipped with gene scanners, retinal identification systems, and psychic screening devices. Courtrooms within fortress precincts serve as the venues where imperial justice manifests in its most formal and ceremonial aspects. These chambers feature raised benches for presiding arbitrators, witness stands equipped with truth verification equipment, and gallery seating for observers when proceedings permit public attendance. The architecture of courtrooms emphasizes the majesty and authority of imperial law, with soaring ceilings, imposing columns, and prominent displays of imperial symbols. The acoustics receive careful attention to ensure that every word spoken carries clearly throughout the chamber, while recording equipment preserves complete transcripts of all proceedings for review by higher authorities. Specialized courtrooms handle different categories of cases, from standard criminal proceedings to complex investigations involving multiple planetary jurisdictions. High-security courtrooms feature additional protective measures, including force field barriers, automated weapon systems, and emergency lockdown procedures designed to contain dangerous defendants or prevent rescue attempts. The most secure courtrooms can operate in complete isolation from the rest of the fortress precinct, with independent power supplies and communication systems that maintain functionality even during siege conditions. The armories of fortress precincts contain the weapons and equipment necessary to support Arbites operations across entire sectors. These facilities house not only individual weapons for arbitrators, but also heavy equipment for siege operations, riot suppression gear, and specialized tools for investigating particular types of crimes. Climate-controlled storage areas preserve ammunition and sensitive equipment, while automated inventory systems track every item from bolt shells to combat shotguns. Access to armories requires multiple levels of authorization, with different personnel granted access to different categories of equipment based on their rank and operational requirements. Maintenance workshops within armories ensure that Arbites equipment remains in perfect working condition despite the harsh environments and intense combat situations encountered during enforcement operations. These workshops employ skilled tech adepts and servitors capable of performing everything from routine cleaning and calibration to major repairs and modifications. Emergency production capabilities allow fortress precincts to manufacture basic ammunition and replacement parts when supply lines become disrupted, ensuring operational continuity even during extended sieges or isolation. Communication arrays represent the nervous system of fortress precincts, connecting individual installations to the broader network of imperial authority stretching across the galaxy. Primary communication spires house astropathic choirs capable of transmitting messages across interstellar distances, while secondary arrays maintain contact with local Imperial forces, planetary governments, and orbiting spacecraft. Redundant systems ensure communication capabilities survive direct attacks, with backup transmitters concealed throughout the fortress precinct and emergency protocols that automatically relay critical information to neighboring installations. The astropathic chambers within communication arrays receive special protection due to the vulnerable nature of psychers and the critical importance of interstellar communication. These chambers feature psychic shielding, null field generators, and emergency termination systems designed to prevent demonic incursion through compromised astropaths. The chambers themselves are lined with blessed silver and inscribed with protective wards, while armed guards maintain constant vigilance over the psychers whose abilities enable communication across the vast distances of space. Living quarters for arbitrators reflect the semi-monastic nature of their service to the Emperor and Imperial law. Individual chambers provide basic accommodation, including sleeping areas, personal storage, and private worship spaces where arbitrators can meditate on their duties and study the intricacies of Imperial law. Senior officers receive larger quarters appropriate to their rank and responsibilities, while common areas provide spaces for meals, physical training, and informal interaction among personnel. The architecture of living quarters emphasizes functionality over comfort, reminding arbitrators that their service demands sacrifice and dedication rather than luxury. Training facilities within fortress precincts ensure that arbitrators maintain peak physical condition and combat readiness throughout their careers. These facilities include firing ranges equipped with variable target systems, combat simulation chambers capable of recreating different planetary environments, and physical training areas with equipment designed to challenge even augmented human capabilities. Specialized training areas allow arbitrators to practice specific skills such as riot suppression, siege warfare, and investigation techniques, while virtual reality systems provide experience with scenarios too dangerous or expensive to recreate physically. The strategic placement of fortress precincts across Imperial worlds follows careful analysis of population distributions, transportation networks, and potential threat vectors. Most fortress precincts occupy positions that allow rapid response to major population centers while maintaining defensible positions that can withstand siege warfare. Urban installations often occupy elevated positions that provide commanding views of surrounding areas, while rural precincts control critical transportation choke points such as spaceports, major highways, or river crossings. The response time calculations that determine fortress precinct placement take into account not only ground-based transportation, but also air support capabilities and orbital insertion techniques. Each fortress precinct maintains detailed response protocols that specify deployment procedures for different types of incidents, from individual criminal investigations to large-scale civil unrest. These protocols include coordination procedures with local Imperial forces, evacuation routes for civilian populations, and contingency plans for scenarios ranging from natural disasters to full-scale rebellion. Defensive capabilities of fortress precincts rival those of military installations, reflecting the reality that Arbites operations often face organized resistance from well-equipped criminal organizations or seditious movements. Void shield generators protect against orbital bombardment and heavy artillery, their energy barriers flickering with barely contained power that can deflect everything from las cannon blasts to plasma warheads. The void shields operate in overlapping patterns that eliminate weak points while allowing defensive weapons to fire through carefully timed gaps in the energy barriers. Automated weapon systems provide continuous defensive coverage without requiring human operators who might be corrupted, overwhelmed, or simply unavailable during critical moments. These systems include anti-aircraft batteries capable of engaging everything from individual aircraft to orbital dropships, point defense systems designed to intercept incoming missiles and artillery shells, and automated heavy bolter turrets that can sweep entire approaches clear of infantry attacks. Machine spirits guide these weapons with programmed loyalty that cannot be subverted by bribery or intimidation, while redundant targeting systems ensure continued operation even when primary sensors suffer damage. The siege-resistant construction methods employed in fortress precincts incorporate lessons learned from conflicts throughout Imperial history. Foundation systems extend deep into planetary bedrock, anchored with adamantium pylons that prevent undermining attempts while providing stable platforms for heavy defensive weapons. Internal compartmentalization ensures that damage to one section does not compromise the entire facility, while redundant life support systems maintain habitability even when primary systems fail. Emergency supplies include food, water, ammunition, and medical supplies sufficient to sustain full garrison strength for extended periods without outside support. Fortress precincts also incorporate advanced detection systems designed to identify threats before they reach the perimeter. Seismic sensors detect underground tunneling attempts, while atmospheric analyzers identify chemical or biological weapons before they can affect personnel. Psychic detection equipment alerts defenders to the presence of unsanctioned psychers or demonic entities, while gene scanners identify individuals whose biological signatures indicate corruption or alien influence. These detection systems operate continuously, feeding information to central command centers where trained analysts evaluate potential threats and coordinate appropriate responses. The hierarchical structure of the Adeptus Arbites reflects the Emperor's understanding that effective law enforcement requires clear chains of command, specialized expertise, and unwavering loyalty to Imperial authority. From the lowest chastener maintaining order in a hab block to the high marshals who oversee entire segmentums from Terra itself, every rank serves a specific function within the greater machinery of Imperial justice. This carefully constructed hierarchy ensures that Imperial law reaches every corner of human space while maintaining the discipline and coordination necessary for operations spanning multiple star systems. At the foundation of Arbites' hierarchy stand the Chasteners, newly inducted officers who have completed their basic training at Schola Progenium facilities but have not yet proven themselves in actual enforcement operations. These junior officers typically serve under direct supervision of experienced arbitrators, learning practical applications of Imperial law through exposure to real criminal investigations and enforcement actions. Chasteners handle routine duties such as prisoner transport, evidence cataloging, and basic patrol functions, while developing the judgment and experience necessary for independent operations. Their distinctive black carapace armor bears minimal rank insignia, reflecting their probationary status within the organization. The selection process for Chasteners begins during the final years of Schola Progenium education, when instructors identify students who demonstrate appropriate temperament, physical capabilities, and intellectual capacity for law enforcement service. Candidates undergo extensive psychological evaluation to ensure their loyalty to Imperial authority and their ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. Physical testing includes combat assessments, endurance trials, and weapons proficiency examinations that determine whether candidates possess the necessary skills to survive in active enforcement roles. Academic testing focuses on legal knowledge, investigative techniques, and understanding of Imperial administrative procedures. Successful candidates receive assignment to fortress precincts where they begin practical training under veteran supervision. This apprenticeship period typically lasts between 2 and 5 years, depending on local conditions and individual progress. Chasteners rotate through different departments within their assigned fortress precinct, gaining exposure to investigation techniques, detention procedures, courtroom protocols, and enforcement operations. Performance evaluations occur regularly, with senior arbitrators assessing both technical competence and adherence to Arbites' values and procedures. Patrol arbitrators represent the next level in the hierarchy, officers who have demonstrated competence in basic enforcement duties and earn the right to conduct independent operations within specified parameters. These officers form the backbone of routine Arbites operations, conducting investigations into minor imperial crimes, maintaining order in civilian populations, and serving as the visible presence of imperial authority in daily life. Patrol arbitrators typically work in teams of 2 or 3, providing mutual support during potentially dangerous situations while ensuring proper witness testimony for any enforcement actions. The responsibilities of patrol arbitrators extend beyond simple law enforcement to include intelligence gathering and community liaison functions. These officers develop detailed knowledge of their assigned territories, identifying potential threats to imperial authority and maintaining contact with local informants who provide information about criminal activities. Patrol arbitrators also serve as the primary interface between the Arbites and civilian populations, explaining imperial regulations to confused citizens and ensuring compliance with newly issued edicts or taxation requirements. Advancement from patrol arbitrator to senior arbitrator requires demonstration of leadership capabilities, advanced investigative skills, and deep understanding of imperial law. Senior arbitrators supervise teams of junior officers while conducting complex investigations that may span multiple worlds or involve high-ranking imperial personnel. These officers possess authority to make arrests without prior authorization from higher ranks, conduct searches of private property, and requisition local resources for enforcement operations. Their enhanced authority comes with corresponding responsibility for the actions of subordinates and the outcomes of investigations under their direction. Senior arbitrators often specialize in particular areas of law enforcement, developing expertise that makes them valuable resources for complex cases. Some focus on financial crimes involving imperial taxation or trade regulations, while others specialize in sedition cases or investigations involving suspected chaos corruption. This specialization allows fortress precincts to deploy appropriate expertise for different types of cases while maintaining general law enforcement capabilities across all areas of imperial jurisprudence. The rank of arbitrator marshal marks the transition from field operations to command responsibilities, though marshals continue to participate directly in major enforcement actions and complex investigations. Arbitrator marshals typically command individual fortress precincts or serve as senior staff officers for regional commands, coordinating operations across multiple installations and managing relationships with other imperial organizations. These officers possess authority to negotiate with planetary governors, requisition military support for major operations, and authorize the use of extreme measures when dealing with serious threats to imperial authority. Arbitrator marshals undergo additional training in strategic planning, resource management, and inter-organizational coordination before assuming their positions. This training includes exposure to the broader imperial bureaucracy, with rotations through administratum facilities, ecclesiarchy institutions, and military commands to develop understanding of how different imperial organizations operate. The political skills required at this level differ significantly from the investigative and enforcement capabilities needed at lower ranks, requiring officers to balance competing interests while maintaining focus on their primary mission of law enforcement. Judges represent the pinnacle of field authority within the Adeptus Arbites, officers who combine extensive legal knowledge with proven leadership capabilities and unwavering loyalty to imperial justice. Judges possess authority to conduct trials, issue sentences up to and including execution, and make binding legal interpretations of imperial law when existing precedents prove inadequate. These officers typically oversee multiple fortress precincts within a subsector, coordinating major investigations and ensuring consistent application of imperial law across their areas of responsibility. The appointment of judges requires approval from Terra-based authorities, reflecting the significant power these officers wield and the potential consequences of their decisions. Candidates undergo extensive review of their service records, psychological evaluation to ensure continued loyalty and stability, and examination by senior judges to verify their legal knowledge and decision-making capabilities. The selection process often takes several years, during which candidates continue their regular duties while undergoing additional training and evaluation. Judges maintain direct communication with higher Arbites authorities and receive regular updates on legal precedents, policy changes, and emerging threats to imperial security. They serve as the primary source of legal interpretation for their regions, issuing guidance to subordinate officers on complex legal questions and ensuring that local enforcement practices conform to imperial standards. When major cases require trial proceedings, judges preside over these hearings with full authority to determine guilt or innocence and impose appropriate sentences according to imperial law. Specialized roles within the Arbites hierarchy reflect the diverse challenges faced by imperial law enforcement across thousands of different worlds and countless criminal organizations. Cyber Mastiff handlers form elite units responsible for tracking fugitives, detecting contraband, and providing security during high-risk operations. These officers undergo extensive training in animal handling, scent tracking, and combat operations alongside their augmented canine partners. The Cyber Mastiffs themselves represent significant investments in time and resources, with each animal receiving extensive cybernetic enhancements that improve their natural abilities while providing direct neural links to their handlers. The selection process for Cyber Mastiff handlers emphasizes psychological compatibility with both animals and cybernetic systems, as handlers must maintain emotional bonds with their partners while managing complex technological interfaces. Training programs last approximately 3 years, during which candidates learn animal psychology, cybernetic maintenance procedures, and specialized tactical techniques that leverage the unique capabilities of human Mastiff teams. Successful handlers develop almost telepathic communication with their partners, enabling coordinated operations that would be impossible for purely human teams. Riot suppression teams represent another specialized branch within the Arbites hierarchy, officers trained and equipped specifically for crowd control and civil disorder situations. These units employ specialized weapons including shock mauls, riot shields, and non-lethal gas dispensers designed to incapacitate large numbers of civilians without causing permanent injury. Riot suppression officers receive extensive training in crowd psychology, formation tactics, and de-escalation techniques that can prevent minor disturbances from developing into full-scale rebellions. The equipment used by riot suppression teams includes advanced protective gear capable of withstanding improvised weapons and thrown objects, while communication systems enable real-time coordination between team members during chaotic situations. Specialized vehicles provide mobile platforms for crowd control operations, equipped with water cannons, sonic disruptors, and barrier deployment systems. These teams train regularly with local Imperial Guard units to ensure seamless coordination when civil unrest escalates beyond the capabilities of purely law enforcement responses. Investigation units within the Arbites structure focus on complex criminal cases that require specialized detective skills and advanced analytical capabilities. These officers receive training in forensic analysis, interrogation techniques, and evidence preservation procedures that enable them to build cases against sophisticated criminal organizations. Investigation specialists often work closely with tech adepts and servitors equipped with advanced analytical equipment, using everything from genetic analysis to psychometric readings to gather evidence that would be impossible to obtain through conventional means. The work of investigation units frequently involves extended operations lasting months or years, as officers build comprehensive cases against criminal networks that span multiple star systems. These investigations require careful coordination with other Imperial organizations, including the Imperial Navy for interplanetary pursuits and the Administratum for access to financial records and bureaucratic documentation. Investigation officers develop extensive networks of informants and contacts throughout Imperial society, maintaining relationships that provide crucial intelligence about criminal activities and emerging threats. Regional command structures within the Adeptus Arbites reflect the administrative divisions of the Imperium itself, with sector marshals overseeing law enforcement operations across entire sectors, while maintaining coordination with other imperial institutions operating at similar scales. Sector marshals typically operate from heavily fortified command centers located on major hive worlds or administrative centers, where they can maintain communication with subordinate commands while accessing the resources necessary for sector-wide operations. The responsibilities of sector marshals extend beyond direct law enforcement to include strategic planning, resource allocation, and policy development for their assigned regions. These officers regularly interact with sector governors, Imperial Navy fleet commanders, and senior administratum officials to coordinate responses to major threats and ensure that law enforcement priorities align with broader Imperial objectives. Sector marshals also serve as the primary liaison between regional Arbites commands and Terra-based authorities, reporting on significant developments and requesting additional resources when local capabilities prove insufficient. Sector marshal positions require officers with extensive experience in multiple aspects of Arbites operations, from field investigations to administrative management. Candidates typically serve in various regional commands before consideration for sector-level positions, gaining exposure to different planetary environments and criminal threats. The appointment process involves review by high marshals on Terra, ensuring that sector commanders possess both the technical competence and political skills necessary for effective operation at this level of responsibility. The ultimate authority within the Adeptus Arbites rests with the high marshals, senior officers who oversee the organization from Terra itself, while maintaining direct communication with the highest levels of imperial government. High marshals typically have responsibility for entire segmentums, coordinating law enforcement operations across hundreds of sectors while developing organization-wide policies and procedures. These officers serve as the primary representatives of the Adeptus Arbites within the broader imperial hierarchy, participating in high-level strategic planning and ensuring that law enforcement priorities support overall imperial objectives. High marshals maintain permanent residences within the Imperial Palace complex on Terra, where they have access to the vast archives of legal precedent and administrative records that guide imperial law enforcement. These officers regularly consult with other senior imperial officials, including administratum department heads, ecclesiarchy hierarchs, and military commanders to coordinate responses to threats that affect multiple imperial institutions. The decisions made by high marshals influence law enforcement operations throughout human space, establishing precedents that guide local commanders and shaping the evolution of imperial jurisprudence. The selection and training processes that produce Arbites officers at all levels emphasize loyalty, competence, and unwavering dedication to imperial law above all other considerations. Schola Progenium facilities throughout the Imperium serve as the primary source of Arbites recruits, though exceptional candidates from other backgrounds occasionally receive consideration for specialized positions. The Schola Progenium curriculum includes extensive study of imperial history, legal principles, and administrative procedures, while physical training develops the combat skills and endurance necessary for enforcement operations in hostile environments. Advanced training programs prepare officers for specialized roles and higher responsibilities, with different curricula designed for investigation specialists, command positions, and technical roles. These programs often involve rotations through different imperial institutions, exposing Arbites officers to the broader context within which they operate while developing professional relationships that facilitate future cooperation. The most promising officers receive assignment to Terra-based facilities, where they gain direct exposure to the highest levels of imperial administration and law enforcement. The weaponry and equipment of the Adeptus Arbites represents millennia of refinement in law enforcement technology, combining proven imperial designs with specialized modifications tailored to the unique challenges of maintaining order across a galaxy-spanning empire. Every piece of equipment carried by an arbitrator serves multiple purposes within the broader framework of imperial justice, designed not merely for combat effectiveness, but to project authority, gather evidence, and maintain the psychological advantage that separates professional law enforcement from simple violence. The standardization of Arbites equipment ensures operational consistency across thousands of worlds while allowing for tactical flexibility in the face of diverse criminal threats. The standard combat shotgun remains the iconic weapon of the Adeptus Arbites, its distinctive profile recognizable to citizens throughout Imperial space as the primary tool of Imperial justice. These weapons feature shortened barrels optimized for close-quarters combat in urban environments, with reinforced stocks capable of serving as improvised clubs when circumstances demand direct physical confrontation. The action mechanism employs a pump-action design that provides reliable function in adverse conditions, while allowing rapid follow-up shots during intense firefights. Arbitrators receive extensive training in shotgun tactics, learning to engage targets at ranges from point-blank to medium distance with various ammunition types. The versatility of the combat shotgun stems largely from its ability to utilize different ammunition types depending on operational requirements. Standard solid shot provides devastating stopping power against unarmored targets, while armor-piercing rounds can penetrate light protective equipment worn by better-equipped criminals. Fléchette rounds create wide dispersal patterns effective against multiple targets in confined spaces, while rubber shot and beanbag rounds offer non-lethal options for crowd control situations where permanent injury might create political complications. Each arbitrator typically carries a selection of different ammunition types, allowing rapid adaptation to changing tactical situations without requiring weapon changes. Executioner rounds represent the most feared ammunition type in the Arbites arsenal, reserved for use against high-priority targets whose crimes demand immediate and final justice. These specialized shells contain mass reactive explosive charges that detonate after penetrating the target, ensuring that even heavily augmented criminals cannot survive direct hits to vital areas. The psychological impact of executioner rounds extends beyond their physical effects, as their distinctive black casings and skull markings serve as visible reminders of the ultimate penalty for defying imperial law. Arbitrators require special authorization to carry executioner rounds, with strict accountability procedures governing their use and expenditure. The shock maul serves as the primary non-lethal weapon for arbitrators, combining traditional baton techniques with advanced imperial technology to provide effective crowd control capabilities. These weapons feature reinforced adamantium cores surrounded by energy field generators that deliver powerful electrical discharges upon contact with targets. The energy output can be adjusted from mild deterrent levels that cause temporary disorientation to maximum settings capable of incapacitating even heavily augmented individuals. The distinctive crackling sound and visible electrical arcs produced by activated shock mauls create immediate psychological effects that often resolve confrontations without requiring actual physical contact. Modern shock mauls incorporate power cells capable of sustaining continuous operation for extended periods, with backup power systems that prevent weapon failure during critical situations. The grip sections feature textured surfaces and neural interface connections that allow experienced users to adjust power settings through thought commands, enabling rapid response to changing threat levels. Training with shock mauls emphasizes precision targeting and appropriate force escalation, as improper use can result in permanent injury or death even when non-lethal outcomes are intended. Suppression shields provide arbitrators with mobile protection during riot control operations and building clearance missions, combining defensive capabilities with integrated weapon systems for maximum tactical effectiveness. These shields feature transparasteel viewing ports that maintain visibility while protecting the user's face and upper torso from projectiles and energy weapons. The shield surface incorporates ablative armor layers capable of absorbing multiple hits from small arms fire, while the internal framework distributes impact forces across the user's arm and shoulder to prevent injury from heavy impacts. The integrated weapon systems built into suppression shields typically include shock projectors that can incapacitate targets at short range, while some variants mount compact las weapons or stub guns for situations requiring lethal force. Power systems within the shield handle both defensive energy fields and offensive weapons, with battery packs providing several hours of continuous operation. The psychological effect of advancing arbitrators carrying suppression shields often proves as effective as their physical protection, as the imposing sight of armored figures advancing behind energy-crackling barriers frequently causes crowds to disperse without requiring direct confrontation. Carapace armor represents the standard protective equipment for all arbitrators, providing comprehensive protection against the wide variety of weapons encountered during law enforcement operations. The armor consists of overlapping plates of blessed ceramite and plasteel, designed to deflect or absorb impacts from everything from improvised weapons to military-grade small arms. The distinctive black coloration serves both practical and psychological purposes, reducing visibility during night operations while projecting an intimidating presence that reinforces Arbites' authority. Imperial eagles and scales of justice adorn the chest plates, while rank insignia and unit markings identify individual officers and their areas of responsibility. The modular design of Arbites' carapace armor allows customization for different operational roles and environmental conditions. Standard patrol configurations emphasize mobility and comfort for extended wear, while assault variants include additional armor plates and integrated weapon systems for high-threat operations. Environmental seals and filtration systems protect against chemical weapons and toxic atmospheres, while built-in communication systems maintain contact with other team members and command centers. Power systems within the armor support various electronic components including targeting aids, sensor equipment, and medical monitoring devices that track the wearer's vital signs. Web guns provide arbitrators with specialized capture capabilities for situations requiring live prisoners, or when lethal force might endanger bystanders. These weapons fire tangled masses of synthetic webbing that expand upon impact, entangling targets and rendering them immobile without causing permanent injury. The webbing material incorporates molecular bonding agents that make it extremely difficult to cut or tear, while time-release chemicals cause the bonds to weaken after several hours to prevent accidental suffocation. Web guns prove particularly effective against suspects attempting to flee through crowded areas where traditional weapons might cause collateral damage. The ammunition for web guns comes in several variants designed for different tactical situations. Standard web rounds provide basic entanglement capabilities suitable for most suspects, while heavy-duty versions can immobilize even augmented individuals or small vehicles. Electrified web rounds combine entanglement with electrical stunning effects, ensuring that captured targets remain unconscious during transport and processing. Specialized rounds include marker chemicals that make escaped suspects easier to track, while emergency variants conceal breaches in spacecraft hulls or create temporary barriers during defensive operations. Pacification devices encompass a wide range of non-lethal weapons designed to control civilian populations without causing permanent harm or creating martyrs for seditious movements. Sonic disruptors generate focused sound waves that cause disorientation and temporary hearing loss, effectively dispersing crowds while avoiding the political complications associated with visible injuries. Neural scramblers emit electromagnetic pulses that interfere with nervous system function, causing temporary paralysis without permanent damage. Gas dispensers release various chemical agents ranging from simple tear gas to sophisticated compounds that induce temporary amnesia or euphoria. The selection and deployment of pacification devices requires careful consideration of local political conditions and potential long-term consequences. Some planetary governments view certain non-lethal weapons as more threatening than conventional firearms, particularly neural scramblers and memory-affecting chemicals that might be perceived as mind control devices. Arbitrators receive extensive training in the appropriate use of pacification equipment, learning to assess crowd dynamics and select the most effective methods for achieving compliance while minimizing political backlash. Rhino armored personnel carriers serve as the primary transport vehicles for arbitrator teams, providing protected mobility and mobile command capabilities during major operations. These vehicles feature the same basic chassis used by Imperial Guard and Space Marine forces, modified with specialized equipment for law enforcement applications. The passenger compartment accommodates a full squad of arbitrators with their equipment, while additional storage areas house riot control gear, investigation equipment, and emergency medical supplies. Communication arrays maintain contact with fortress precincts and other Imperial forces, while sensor systems provide real-time intelligence about local conditions. The armament of Arbites Rhinos typically emphasizes crowd control and area denial rather than anti-armor capabilities, though heavy weapons remain available for situations involving organized resistance. Pintle-mounted heavy stubbers provide suppressive fire against large groups of suspects, while smoke launchers create concealment for dismounting troops. Some variants mount sonic disruptors or gas dispensers for crowd control operations, while command vehicles include enhanced communication equipment and mobile courtroom facilities for conducting field trials when circumstances prevent transport to fortress precincts. Repressor riot control vehicles represent specialized adaptations of the Rhino chassis designed specifically for urban pacification operations. These vehicles feature enhanced armor protection against improvised weapons and explosive devices commonly encountered during civil unrest, while specialized suspension systems provide stability when deploying crowd control equipment. The most distinctive feature of repressor vehicles is their shock ram front sections, designed to breach barricades and clear obstacles while minimizing damage to surrounding structures. Electrified hull sections discourage attempts to board or disable the vehicle through direct assault. The weapon systems mounted on repressor vehicles focus entirely on non-lethal crowd control capabilities, including water cannons capable of dispersing large crowds, foam dispensers that create slippery surfaces to prevent organized charges, and barrier deployment systems that can quickly establish perimeters around trouble areas. Some variants include prisoner transport capabilities with secure holding cells, allowing immediate detention of ringleaders and agitators without requiring separate transport vehicles. The psychological impact of repressor vehicles often proves as effective as their physical capabilities, as their imposing presence and obvious crowd control modifications frequently cause dispersal before direct intervention becomes necessary. Arvis lighters provide rapid deployment capabilities for arbitrator teams, particularly in situations requiring immediate response across large distances or difficult terrain. These aircraft feature vertical takeoff and landing capabilities that allow operation from fortress precinct landing pads or improvised sites near incident locations. The passenger compartment accommodates a full squad with equipment, while external hardpoints can mount additional supplies or specialized equipment depending on mission requirements. Stealth modifications reduce sensor signatures and noise levels, enabling covert insertions when surprise proves tactically advantageous. The versatility of Arvis lighters makes them invaluable for operations ranging from routine prisoner transport to emergency response during natural disasters or terrorist attacks. Medical evacuation variants include life support equipment and surgical facilities for treating injured personnel, while command variants provide mobile coordination centers for complex operations involving multiple agencies. Some lighters receive modifications for specific environmental conditions, including sealed atmospheric systems for operations on hostile worlds and enhanced armor for deployment in active combat zones. Cyber Mastiffs represent one of the most sophisticated pieces of equipment employed by the Adeptus Arbites, combining enhanced biological capabilities with advanced cybernetic systems to create tracking and combat companions unmatched by purely mechanical or biological alternatives. The creation process begins with carefully selected canine specimens, chosen for intelligence, loyalty, and physical characteristics suitable for law enforcement applications. Genetic screening eliminates hereditary defects while identifying individuals with exceptional sensory capabilities and trainability factors that predict success in cybernetic enhancement procedures. The cybernetic augmentation process transforms ordinary canines into formidable law enforcement tools while preserving the natural instincts and emotional bonds that make them effective partners for human handlers. Sensory enhancements include olfactory amplifiers that increase scent detection capabilities by several orders of magnitude, allowing cybermastiffs to track suspects across urban environments where natural scents would be overwhelmed by industrial pollution and human activity. Auditory enhancements provide frequency ranges beyond normal canine hearing, enabling detection of electronic devices and communication equipment that might indicate criminal activity. Physical augmentations focus on durability and combat effectiveness while maintaining the natural agility and speed that make canines superior to mechanical alternatives in many situations. Reinforced skeletal structures support increased muscle mass and provide protection against small arms fire, while subcutaneous armor plating protects vital organs without significantly impacting mobility. Neural interface systems allow direct communication between cybermastiffs and their handlers, enabling complex tactical coordination that would be impossible with voice commands alone. The tactical applications of cybermastiffs extend far beyond simple tracking and detection roles to encompass active combat support and specialized investigation techniques. During building clearance operations, cybermastiffs can detect concealed suspects through enhanced senses while providing early warning of booby traps and ambush positions. Their small size and natural agility allow access to areas too dangerous or confined for human personnel, while their enhanced durability enables operation in environments that would incapacitate unaugmented animals. Training programs for cybermastiff teams emphasize the development of seamless cooperation between human and canine partners, with handlers learning to interpret and respond to information provided through neural links, while cybermastiffs develop understanding of complex tactical situations and appropriate responses. The bonding process typically requires several months of intensive interaction, during which handlers and their partners develop the trust and communication necessary for effective operation in high-stress situations. Successful teams often develop almost telepathic coordination that allows rapid adaptation to changing circumstances without requiring explicit commands. The maintenance requirements for cybermastiffs combine veterinary care with technical support, requiring specialized facilities and personnel trained in both biological and mechanical systems. Regular medical examinations monitor the integration between cybernetic components and biological systems, while software updates ensure that electronic systems remain compatible with evolving tactical requirements. The lifespan of cybermastiffs typically exceeds that of unaugmented animals due to medical monitoring and cybernetic life support systems, though the emotional bonds formed with handlers often make retirement decisions particularly difficult for both partners. The Lex Imperialis stands as the supreme legal codex of the Imperium, a monumental work that transcends planetary boundaries and local customs to establish unified standards of justice across the galaxy. This comprehensive legal framework emerged from the Emperor's recognition that military conquest alone could not sustain a galactic empire, requiring instead a common foundation of law that would bind together countless human worlds under a single, immutable system of justice. The Codex addresses every aspect of imperial governance, from the fundamental rights and obligations of citizenship to the complex regulations governing interplanetary commerce, taxation, and military service. The core tenets of imperial law rest upon three fundamental principles that form the bedrock of all legal interpretation and enforcement throughout human space. The first and most sacred principle demands absolute loyalty to the Emperor as the supreme authority over all human affairs, recognizing his divine mandate to rule and his infinite wisdom in establishing the laws that govern imperial society. This loyalty extends beyond mere obedience to encompass active support for imperial institutions, cooperation with lawful authorities, and the duty to report seditious activities that threaten the stability of imperial rule. Citizens who demonstrate unwavering loyalty receive protection under imperial law, while those who betray this fundamental obligation face the full weight of imperial justice. The second principle requires the identification and punishment of heresy in all its manifestations, recognizing that corruption of human souls poses the greatest threat to imperial survival. Heretical beliefs, whether they involve worship of false gods, rejection of imperial authority, or acceptance of alien influence, represent fundamental violations of human nature that demand immediate and decisive response. The definition of heresy encompasses not merely active worship of chaos entities, but any deviation from approved imperial doctrine that might weaken human resistance to corruption. Citizens bear responsibility for monitoring their own thoughts and actions while reporting suspicious behavior among their neighbors and colleagues. The third principle emphasizes the maintenance of order as essential to imperial prosperity and security, recognizing that chaos and disorder create opportunities for enemies of humanity to exploit. This principle encompasses everything from basic civil obedience to complex regulations governing trade, transportation, and communication between worlds. Order requires not merely the absence of criminal activity, but the positive cooperation of all citizens in supporting imperial institutions and maintaining the social structures that enable effective governance across vast distances and diverse populations. These core principles generate specific legal obligations that apply to every imperial citizen, regardless of their planetary origin, social status, or economic circumstances. The duty of loyalty manifests in requirements for military service when called upon, payment of imperial tithes according to established assessments, and cooperation with imperial officials in the execution of their lawful duties. Citizens must carry proper identification documents, submit to security inspections when required, and provide truthful testimony when called as witnesses in legal proceedings. Failure to meet these basic obligations constitutes criminal behavior subject to prosecution under imperial law. The categories of imperial crimes reflect the diverse threats faced by a galaxy-spanning civilization, ranging from individual acts of defiance to organized conspiracies that span multiple star systems. Sedition represents one of the most serious categories of imperial crime, encompassing any attempt to undermine imperial authority through words, actions, or omissions that weaken citizen loyalty or encourage resistance to lawful commands. Seditious activities include spreading false information about imperial policies, organizing unauthorized political gatherings, and distributing materials that question imperial authority or promote alternative forms of government. The prosecution of sedition cases requires careful analysis of intent and effect, as the Lex Imperialis recognizes distinctions between innocent criticism of local administrators and deliberate attempts to undermine imperial rule. Citizens retain limited rights to petition for redress of grievances through proper channels, while local officials may face criticism for failures to implement imperial policies effectively. However, any criticism that extends to questioning the fundamental legitimacy of imperial authority or suggesting alternatives to the emperor's rule crosses the line into seditious behavior subject to severe punishment. Heresy represents the most severe category of imperial crime, encompassing not merely religious deviation, but any corruption of human nature that threatens the spiritual integrity of imperial citizens. The prosecution of heresy cases involves specialized procedures designed to protect investigators and court personnel from potential corruption while ensuring thorough examination of evidence. Suspected heretics undergo extensive interrogation using approved techniques that range from conventional questioning to psychic examination and chemical enhancement of memory recall. The burden of proof in heresy cases differs from standard criminal proceedings, as the potential consequences of allowing corruption to spread justify extraordinary measures to ensure accurate determination of guilt or innocence. The definition of heretical behavior continues to evolve as imperial authorities encounter new forms of corruption and alien influence throughout the galaxy. Traditional forms of heresy include worship of chaos entities, acceptance of alien philosophies, and practice of unauthorized psychic abilities. However, more subtle forms of corruption receive equal attention, including excessive individualism that undermines social cohesion, technological innovation that deviates from approved patterns, and intellectual pursuits that lead to questioning of imperial doctrine. The ecclesiarchy provides guidance on theological matters related to heresy charges, while the Adeptus Arbites maintains responsibility for investigation and prosecution of cases involving heretical behavior. Financial crimes against the Imperium encompass a broad range of activities that threaten the economic foundations of imperial power, from individual tax evasion to massive corruption schemes involving planetary governors and administratum officials. The imperial tithe system requires every world to contribute specified percentages of their production to support imperial military forces, administrative operations, and infrastructure projects. Attempts to evade or reduce these obligations through false reporting, hidden assets, or deliberate inefficiency constitute serious crimes that can result in sanctions ranging from increased assessments to direct imperial intervention in planetary governance. Smuggling represents a particularly complex category of imperial crime due to the vast distances involved in interplanetary commerce and the difficulty of monitoring all trade activities across thousands of worlds. The Lex Imperialis distinguishes between minor violations involving small quantities of restricted goods and major operations that threaten imperial security or economic stability. Unauthorized transportation of weapons, psychic individuals, or xenotech materials receives the most severe penalties, while smuggling of luxury goods or tax avoidance through false documentation typically results in financial penalties and confiscation of contraband materials. The regulation of interplanetary commerce requires extensive coordination between multiple imperial institutions, with the Adeptus Arbites focusing on enforcement, while the administratum handles licensing and taxation procedures. Merchant vessels must carry proper documentation for all cargo, submit to inspections at designated checkpoints, and pay appropriate duties and fees for goods transported between worlds. The complexity of these regulations creates opportunities for both innocent mistakes and deliberate violations, requiring arbitrators to exercise judgment in determining appropriate responses to discovered infractions. Corruption within imperial institutions represents a particularly serious threat to effective governance, as it undermines citizen confidence while providing opportunities for enemies of the Imperium to exploit weaknesses in administrative systems. The Lex Imperialis establishes strict standards for imperial personnel, prohibiting acceptance of unauthorized gifts, use of official position for personal gain, and failure to report known violations of imperial law. The investigation of corruption cases often requires cooperation between multiple agencies, as corrupt officials typically attempt to conceal their activities through complex schemes involving false documentation and collusion with criminal organizations. The judicial procedures established by the Lex Imperialis balance the need for thorough investigation with the practical requirements of governing a galaxy spanning empire. Standard criminal proceedings begin with formal charges filed by authorized imperial officials, followed by investigation periods that allow gathering of evidence and identification of witnesses. Defendants receive notification of charges against them and opportunity to present evidence in their defense, though the specific procedures vary depending on the severity of alleged crimes and local security conditions. Trial proceedings emphasize efficiency and accuracy rather than elaborate ceremony, recognizing that prolonged legal processes can create opportunities for corruption or intimidation of witnesses. Presiding arbitrators or judges review evidence presented by both prosecution and defense, question witnesses under oath, and render verdicts based on established legal standards. The burden of proof varies according to the nature of charges, with heresy and sedition cases requiring different standards than conventional criminal matters due to the potential consequences of incorrect decisions. The option of trial by combat remains available for certain categories of cases, reflecting ancient traditions that predate imperial unification while serving practical purposes in situations where conventional evidence proves inadequate. Defendants may request trial by combat when facing charges that carry death sentences, provided they can demonstrate reasonable doubt about their guilt through conventional proceedings. The combat itself follows strict protocols designed to ensure fairness while minimizing the risk of corruption or outside interference. Champions may represent defendants who lack personal combat capabilities, though the selection of champions requires approval from presiding judicial authorities. Trial by combat procedures include extensive preparation periods during which both parties may train and prepare their equipment according to established guidelines. The combat itself takes place in secure facilities under the supervision of imperial officials, with medical personnel standing by to provide immediate treatment for injuries. Victory in trial by combat results in complete exoneration of all charges, while defeat confirms guilt and results in immediate execution of sentence. The psychological impact of trial by combat often encourages defendants to accept plea agreements or provide cooperation with ongoing investigations rather than risk death in single combat. Summary execution authority represents the most extreme enforcement power available to senior arbitrators and judges, reserved for situations where immediate action becomes necessary to prevent greater harm to imperial interests. This authority applies primarily to cases involving active heretical corruption, armed resistance to imperial authority, or clear and present dangers to civilian populations. The decision to authorize summary execution requires careful consideration of circumstances and potential consequences, as improper use of this power can create political complications and undermine public confidence in imperial justice. The procedures governing summary execution emphasize documentation and accountability while recognizing the need for rapid response in emergency situations. Officers authorized to order summary executions must file detailed reports explaining their decisions and the circumstances that justified immediate action rather than conventional trial proceedings. These reports undergo review by higher authorities to ensure compliance with established guidelines and to identify potential improvements in procedures or training that might prevent similar situations in the future. The relationship between imperial law and local planetary governance creates complex jurisdictional questions that require careful analysis and coordination between different levels of authority. Planetary governors retain responsibility for local criminal matters that do not affect imperial interests, including most civil disputes, minor criminal offenses, and administrative functions that serve purely local purposes. However, any crime that involves imperial personnel, property, or interests falls under the jurisdiction of the Adeptus Arbites regardless of where it occurs or who commits it. The determination of jurisdictional boundaries often depends on subtle factors that require detailed knowledge of both imperial law and local circumstances. When a planetary noble embezzles funds from local taxation, planetary authorities typically handle the case through their own legal systems. However, if those same funds were designated for imperial tithes, or if the embezzlement scheme involves off-world accomplices, the case falls under imperial jurisdiction and requires investigation by the Adeptus Arbites. The complexity of modern commerce and administration creates frequent situations where crimes affect both local and imperial interests, requiring coordination between different legal systems. Jurisdictional conflicts arise when local authorities attempt to assert control over cases that properly belong under imperial jurisdiction, or when imperial officials exceed their authority by interfering in purely local matters. The resolution of these conflicts requires careful application of established precedents and consideration of political factors that might affect the stability of imperial rule. Local governors who consistently challenge imperial jurisdiction may find themselves subject to investigation for seditious behavior, while imperial officials who overstep their authority face disciplinary action that can include removal from office and criminal prosecution. The enforcement of imperial edicts and regulations requires ongoing cooperation between imperial and local authorities, as the Adeptus Arbites lacks the personnel necessary to monitor compliance with every aspect of imperial law on every world. Local law enforcement agencies serve as the primary means of detecting violations of imperial regulations, reporting suspicious activities to Arbites authorities for further investigation. This system depends on proper training of local personnel in imperial law and maintenance of communication systems that enable rapid reporting of significant violations. The integration of imperial and local legal systems creates opportunities for both cooperation and conflict, depending on the competence and loyalty of local authorities. Worlds with effective local governance often require minimal direct imperial intervention, as local officials handle most law enforcement matters while referring appropriate cases to imperial jurisdiction. However, worlds with corrupt or incompetent local governments may require extensive imperial oversight and direct intervention to maintain order and ensure compliance with imperial law. The vast expanse of the Imperium harbors countless threats to the established order that the Adeptus Arbites sworn to protect. These enemies of imperial law manifest in forms ranging from subtle corruption that spreads through generations to overt rebellion that demands immediate and overwhelming response. Each category of threat requires specialized knowledge, tactics, and equipment to combat effectively, while the interconnected nature of criminal organizations and seditious movements creates complex challenges that test the capabilities of even veteran arbitrators. Chaos cults represent perhaps the most insidious threat to imperial authority, operating through networks of corrupted individuals who spread their taint through seemingly innocent social gatherings, religious meetings, and commercial enterprises. These organizations typically begin with a single corrupted individual who gradually influences friends, family members, and colleagues through carefully orchestrated exposure to heretical ideas and practices. The initial corruption often appears harmless, manifesting as alternative philosophical discussions, unconventional artistic expressions, or simply questioning established imperial doctrine in ways that seem reasonable to those unfamiliar with the subtle signs of chaos influence. The identification of chaos cults requires extensive training in recognizing behavioral patterns and symbolic representations that indicate heretical activity. Arbitrators learn to detect subtle changes in local crime patterns that might indicate cult influence, such as unexplained disappearances of specific demographic groups, unusual animal mutilations that follow ritual patterns, or reports of strange sounds and lights emanating from abandoned buildings during specific lunar phases. The investigation of suspected cult activity demands extreme caution, as exposure to chaos corruption can affect even experienced law enforcement personnel who lack proper spiritual protection and mental discipline. Cult recruitment strategies exploit existing social tensions and individual vulnerabilities to create psychological conditions conducive to accepting heretical beliefs. Economic hardship, political oppression, social isolation, and personal trauma all provide opportunities for cult agents to approach potential recruits with promises of power, belonging, or revenge against those responsible for their suffering. The recruitment process typically involves gradual escalation of commitment, beginning with attendance at seemingly innocent gatherings and progressing through increasingly explicit heretical activities until new members become fully committed to the cult's agenda. The organizational structure of chaos cults varies significantly depending on their patron entities and local circumstances, though most follow hierarchical patterns that concentrate power among a small group of fully corrupted leaders while maintaining plausible deniability for newer members. Lower-level cultists often remain unaware of their organization's true nature, believing themselves to be members of legitimate religious groups, philosophical societies, or political movements. This compartmentalized structure makes it difficult for imperial authorities to identify the full extent of cult operations, even when individual members face capture and interrogation. Advanced chaos cults develop sophisticated operational capabilities that rival those of professional criminal organizations, including secure communication networks, weapons caches, and infiltration of local government and law enforcement agencies. These groups often maintain legitimate business enterprises that provide cover for their activities while generating revenue to support cult operations. The investigation of such organizations requires coordination between multiple imperial agencies, as cult networks frequently span several worlds and involve complex financial arrangements that disguise the flow of resources to heretical activities. The corruption spread by chaos cults extends beyond individual members to affect entire communities through environmental contamination, psychological manipulation, and supernatural phenomena that gradually weaken resistance to heretical influence. Areas with significant cult activity often experience increases in violent crime, substance abuse, and mental illness, as the spiritual corruption affects even those who have no direct contact with cult members. These secondary effects create additional challenges for law enforcement agencies, as they must address both the immediate symptoms of social decay and the underlying heretical causes that produce them. Criminal syndicates operating across multiple star systems pose different but equally serious challenges to imperial authority, as their activities undermine the economic foundations of imperial power while providing resources and capabilities that other enemies of the Imperium can exploit. These organizations typically focus on profit rather than ideological goals, though their willingness to trade with anyone who can pay often results in support for seditious movements and heretical cults. The investigation of interplanetary criminal networks requires specialized techniques and equipment capable of tracking complex financial transactions and communication patterns across vast distances. Smuggling operations represent the most common form of organized criminal activity encountered by the Adeptus Arbites, ranging from small-scale tax evasion schemes to massive operations that transport prohibited goods between entire sectors. The vast scale of legitimate interplanetary commerce creates numerous opportunities for criminal organizations to conceal illegal activities among legitimate cargo shipments, while the complexity of imperial trade regulations provides cover for schemes that exploit bureaucratic confusion and jurisdictional gaps. Arbitrators assigned to anti-smuggling duties must develop detailed knowledge of commercial procedures, shipping schedules, and cargo handling techniques to identify suspicious activities among the millions of legitimate transactions that occur daily throughout imperial space. The most dangerous smuggling operations involve the transportation of weapons, psychic individuals, and xenotech artifacts that pose direct threats to imperial security. Weapons smuggling typically serves to arm seditious movements or criminal organizations, while the illegal transportation of unsanctioned psychers creates risks of demonic incursion and chaos corruption. Xenotech smuggling represents perhaps the greatest threat, as alien artifacts often contain unknown technologies or spiritual contamination that can corrupt entire populations if released into general circulation. Black market activities encompass a broad range of illegal commercial enterprises that operate parallel to legitimate imperial commerce, providing goods and services that violate imperial law or circumvent established taxation and regulation systems. These markets typically develop in areas with weak law enforcement presence or corrupt local authorities, creating economic incentives that attract criminal organizations and provide funding for other illegal activities. The suppression of black markets requires sustained enforcement efforts that address both the supply and demand aspects of illegal commerce, while avoiding economic disruption that might create political complications. The investigation of black market operations often reveals connections to legitimate businesses and government officials who provide protection, information, or services that enable illegal activities to continue. These corruption networks create additional challenges for law enforcement agencies, as they must carefully distinguish between willing participants in criminal enterprises and individuals who cooperate under duress or without full knowledge of the illegal nature of their activities. The prosecution of corruption cases requires extensive documentation and careful coordination with other imperial agencies to ensure that enforcement actions do not inadvertently disrupt essential government functions. Genestealer cults represent a unique category of threat that combines the insidious nature of chaos corruption with the patient, multi-generational approach of alien infiltration. These organizations begin with the infection of individual humans by genestealer organisms, creating hybrid offspring who retain human appearance while possessing alien instincts and capabilities. The infected individuals typically remain unaware of their true nature for years or decades, living normal lives while unconsciously preparing for the eventual arrival of their alien masters. The detection of genestealer cults requires different investigative techniques than those used against conventional criminal organizations, as the alien influence operates on biological and psychological levels that may not produce obvious behavioral changes in early generation hybrids. Arbitrators trained in counter-infiltration operations learn to recognize subtle patterns in family genealogies, medical records, and social relationships that might indicate genestealer infection. These investigations often require cooperation with Adeptus Mechanicus personnel who possess the technical expertise necessary to conduct genetic analysis and identify biological markers of alien contamination. First-generation genestealer hybrids typically exhibit obvious physical deformities that make them unsuitable for normal social interaction, leading infected families to conceal these individuals in basements, abandoned buildings, or remote locations where their presence will not attract attention. The discovery of hidden hybrid populations often provides the first concrete evidence of genestealer infiltration, though by this point, the infection may have spread through multiple family lines over several generations. The investigation of suspected genestealer activity requires extreme caution, as hybrid individuals possess enhanced physical capabilities and may attempt violent resistance when their true nature faces exposure. Second and third generation hybrids present greater challenges for detection and apprehension, as their physical appearance becomes increasingly human, while their alien instincts and capabilities remain largely intact. These individuals often achieve positions of responsibility within local government, law enforcement, or commercial organizations, using their authority to protect the cult and facilitate further infiltration. The identification of hybrid infiltrators requires careful analysis of personnel records, behavioral patterns, and decision-making processes that might reveal alien influence on human institutions. The organizational structure of genestealer cults reflects their alien origins while adapting to human social patterns, creating hierarchies based on genetic proximity to the original genestealer organism rather than conventional measures of competence or loyalty. The cult's ultimate goal involves preparing for the arrival of a Tyranid hive fleet, though individual members may remain unaware of this objective while working toward intermediate goals that serve the alien agenda. The suppression of genestealer cults requires coordination with imperial military forces, as the alien organisms possess capabilities that exceed those of conventional criminal organizations. Separatist movements represent overt challenges to imperial authority that typically develop when local populations become convinced that independence from the Imperium would improve their circumstances. These movements often begin with legitimate grievances about imperial taxation, military recruitment, or administrative policies, but evolve into organized resistance that threatens the stability of imperial rule. The investigation of separatist activities requires careful analysis of political conditions and social dynamics that create opportunities for anti-imperial sentiment to develop into active resistance. The leadership of separatist movements typically includes individuals with legitimate political credentials and popular support, making their suppression more complex than simple criminal enforcement actions. Planetary governors, military officers, and religious leaders who support separatist causes often possess legal authority and institutional resources that they can use to protect their movements from imperial investigation. The prosecution of separatist leaders requires careful documentation of specific illegal activities rather than simply opposition to imperial policies, as the Lex Imperialis recognizes limited rights to petition for redress of grievances through proper channels. Rebellious planetary governors present particularly serious challenges to imperial authority, as their positions provide access to military forces, financial resources, and administrative systems that can support large-scale resistance to imperial rule. The investigation of suspected gubernatorial rebellion requires coordination with multiple imperial agencies, including the Administratum for Financial Analysis, the Imperial Guard for Military Intelligence, and the Ecclesiarchy for assessment of religious factors that might influence local populations. The evidence-gathering process must proceed carefully to avoid alerting the governor to imperial suspicions while building cases that can justify direct intervention. The motivations behind gubernatorial rebellion vary significantly, ranging from personal ambition and corruption to genuine belief that independence would benefit their populations. Some governors succumb to chaos, corruption, or alien influence that gradually erodes their loyalty to the emperor, while others simply become convinced that their worlds would prosper under different leadership. The investigation of rebellious governors requires analysis of their decision-making patterns, financial transactions, and communication with off-world contacts to determine whether their actions constitute simple incompetence, criminal corruption, or active sedition. Political sedition encompasses a broad range of activities that undermine imperial authority without necessarily involving overt rebellion or criminal behavior. Seditious individuals and organizations work to erode citizen loyalty through propaganda, misinformation, and the promotion of alternative political philosophies that question the legitimacy of imperial rule. The investigation of seditious activities requires careful attention to legal distinctions between legitimate criticism of government policies and illegal attempts to undermine imperial authority. The identification of seditious materials requires extensive knowledge of imperial doctrine and approved political discourse, as seditious messages often appear as reasonable criticism or alternative perspectives on current events. Arbitrators trained in counter-sedition operations learn to recognize subtle propaganda techniques, coded language, and symbolic representations that convey anti-imperial messages while maintaining plausible deniability. The investigation of seditious networks often reveals connections between seemingly unrelated individuals and organizations that coordinate their activities to maximize their impact on public opinion. Underground printing operations and illegal communication networks provide the infrastructure necessary for seditious organizations to distribute their materials and coordinate their activities across multiple worlds. These operations typically employ sophisticated security measures to protect their personnel and equipment from imperial detection, including the use of coded messages, secure meeting locations, and compartmentalized organizational structures that limit the damage caused by the capture of individual members. The suppression of seditious communication networks requires specialized technical expertise and extensive surveillance capabilities that can identify and track illegal transmissions across interplanetary distances. The prosecution of sedition cases requires careful analysis of intent and effect, as the Lex Imperialis recognizes important distinctions between legitimate political discourse and illegal attempts to undermine imperial authority. Citizens retain limited rights to criticize government policies and petition for redress of grievances, provided their activities remain within established legal boundaries and do not encourage resistance to lawful imperial commands. The determination of these boundaries often requires detailed knowledge of local political conditions and cultural factors that influence how populations interpret and respond to different types of political messages. The investigative techniques employed by the Adeptus Arbites represent millennia of refinement in law enforcement methodology, combining traditional detective work with advanced imperial technology to uncover criminal activities across the vast expanse of human space. These methods must function effectively regardless of planetary conditions, local customs, or technological capabilities, requiring standardized procedures that can adapt to diverse environments while maintaining the exacting standards of imperial justice. Every investigation begins with systematic evidence gathering that establishes the facts of a case before proceeding to more specialized techniques designed to identify perpetrators and build prosecutable cases under imperial law. Forensic analysis forms the cornerstone of Arbites' investigative procedures, utilizing sophisticated imperial technology to extract information from crime scenes that would be invisible to conventional observation. Auspex scanners provide detailed analysis of physical evidence, detecting trace amounts of substances, identifying biological materials, and mapping the sequence of events through careful examination of environmental disturbances. These devices can identify specific individuals through genetic analysis of skin cells, hair follicles, or bodily fluids left at crime scenes, while advanced pattern recognition algorithms compare evidence against vast databases maintained in Fortress Precinct archives. The preservation and analysis of evidence requires specialized facilities within Fortress precincts, equipped with environmental controls that prevent contamination while maintaining the integrity of collected materials. Evidence storage chambers feature atmospheric regulation systems that can maintain samples in various environmental conditions, from the frozen preservation necessary for biological materials to the inert gas environments required for certain chemical evidence. Chain of custody procedures ensure that evidence remains uncontaminated from collection through trial proceedings, with automated tracking systems that record every individual who handles evidence and document any changes in storage conditions. Ballistic analysis represents a crucial component of weapons-related investigations, as the distinctive markings left by different weapon types can identify specific firearms used in criminal activities. Imperial weapons manufacturing standards create unique characteristics in barrel rifling, firing pin impressions, and ejector marks that allow forensic specialists to match recovered projectiles and cartridge cases to specific weapons. Advanced scanning equipment can detect microscopic variations in metal composition and manufacturing tolerances that provide additional identification markers beyond simple ballistic comparisons. Chemical analysis capabilities enable arbitrators to identify exotic substances that might indicate off-world criminal connections or the use of prohibited materials in criminal enterprises. Spectral analysis equipment can determine the precise composition of unknown substances, while molecular scanners identify specific chemical signatures that indicate planetary origin or manufacturing processes. This capability proves particularly valuable when investigating smuggling operations that transport goods between different worlds, as chemical analysis can often determine the source of contraband materials even when shipping records have been falsified or destroyed. Interrogation techniques employed by the Adeptus Arbites balance the need for accurate information with the legal requirements of imperial justice, utilizing both psychological methods and technological enhancement to extract truthful testimony from suspects and witnesses. Standard interrogation procedures begin with conventional questioning, designed to establish basic facts and identify inconsistencies in suspect statements. Trained interrogators learn to recognize verbal and physical indicators of deception while building psychological pressure that encourages cooperation without crossing legal boundaries established by imperial law. Truth verification equipment provides technological support for interrogation procedures, though its use requires careful consideration of legal and practical factors that might affect the reliability of results. Neural scanners can detect physiological responses associated with deceptive statements, while chemical enhancement drugs can reduce psychological barriers to truthful testimony. However, these techniques prove less effective against individuals with specialized training in resistance methods or those whose mental state has been altered by drugs, psychic influence, or chaos corruption. Psychic interrogation represents the most advanced form of questioning available to Imperial law enforcement, though its use remains strictly regulated due to the risks associated with unsanctioned psychic activity. Sanctioned psychers assigned to Arbites units can conduct mental probes that reveal information hidden in suspect memories, while psychometric analysis of objects can provide insights into the thoughts and emotions of individuals who previously handled evidence. These techniques require extensive protective measures to prevent psychic contamination of investigation personnel, while ensuring that information obtained through psychic means meets legal standards for admissibility in trial proceedings. The preparation for psychic interrogation involves comprehensive screening of both suspects and investigation personnel to identify potential risks and contraindications that might compromise the procedure. Suspects undergo medical and psychological evaluation to determine their suitability for psychic examination, while participating psychers receive detailed briefings on the specific information sought and potential hazards associated with the suspect's mental state. Protective wards and null field generators provide additional security during psychic procedures, while medical personnel stand by to provide immediate treatment for any adverse effects. Surveillance operations conducted by the Adeptus Arbites employ both technological systems and human intelligence networks to monitor criminal activities and gather evidence of illegal behavior. Electronic surveillance equipment includes microtransmitters that can be concealed in clothing or personal effects, providing real-time audio monitoring of suspect conversations and activities. Visual surveillance systems utilize compact recording devices that can operate for extended periods without maintenance, while advanced optical equipment enables observation from distances that prevent detection by surveillance targets. The deployment of surveillance equipment requires careful planning to ensure legal compliance with imperial regulations governing privacy rights and evidence collection procedures. Arbitrators must obtain proper authorization before installing surveillance devices in private residences or commercial establishments, while surveillance of imperial personnel requires additional approvals from higher authorities. The evidence collected through surveillance operations must meet specific standards for authenticity and chain of custody to ensure admissibility in legal proceedings. Human intelligence networks provide capabilities that technological surveillance cannot match, particularly in situations involving criminal organizations that employ counter-surveillance measures or operate in environments where electronic equipment proves ineffective. Informant recruitment focuses on individuals who possess access to criminal activities while maintaining sufficient motivation to cooperate with imperial authorities. These informants include former criminals seeking reduced sentences, individuals with financial motivations, and citizens who genuinely support imperial law enforcement efforts. The management of informant networks requires sophisticated security procedures to protect the identity and safety of cooperating individuals while ensuring the reliability of information they provide. Informants typically receive code names and communication protocols that prevent their identification by criminal organizations, while their handlers employ various techniques to verify the accuracy of reported information. Financial compensation and legal protection programs provide incentives for continued cooperation while addressing the practical needs of individuals who risk personal safety to assist imperial law enforcement. Counter-surveillance techniques enable arbitrators to detect and neutralize criminal attempts to monitor law enforcement activities, protecting ongoing investigations while gathering intelligence about criminal capabilities and intentions. These techniques include the use of scanning equipment that can detect electronic surveillance devices, behavioral analysis that identifies individuals conducting physical surveillance, and communication security measures that prevent interception of law enforcement transmissions. Advanced counter-surveillance operations may involve deliberate misinformation campaigns designed to mislead criminal organizations about the scope and direction of ongoing investigations. The coordination of surveillance activities across multiple worlds requires sophisticated communication systems and standardized procedures that enable effective cooperation between different Arbites commands. Interplanetary surveillance operations often involve subjects who travel between worlds as part of their criminal activities, requiring real-time coordination between investigation teams on different planets. Secure communication protocols ensure that sensitive information about ongoing surveillance operations remains protected while enabling rapid sharing of intelligence that might affect operations in other jurisdictions. Riot suppression tactics employed by the Adeptus Arbites reflect centuries of experience in crowd control operations across thousands of different worlds, each with unique cultural traditions and environmental conditions that affect the dynamics of civil unrest. These tactics emphasize the restoration of order through minimum necessary force, while protecting both law enforcement personnel and civilian populations from injury or death. The psychological impact of professional crowd control often proves more effective than physical force, as the visible presence of well-equipped and disciplined arbitrators frequently causes crowds to disperse before direct confrontation becomes necessary. Formation tactics represent the foundation of effective crowd control, with arbitrator teams deploying in coordinated patterns that maximize their effectiveness while minimizing their vulnerability to crowd actions. Standard formations include shield walls that provide protection while advancing through hostile crowds, wedge formations designed to split large groups into smaller segments, and containment formations that prevent crowd movement while allowing peaceful dispersal. These formations require extensive training and practice to execute effectively under the stress and confusion of actual riot conditions. The use of non-lethal weapons during crowd control operations requires careful consideration of crowd composition, environmental factors, and potential political consequences of different suppression techniques. Shock mauls and neural disruptors provide effective means of incapacitating individual agitators without causing permanent injury, while gas dispensers can disperse large crowds through chemical irritants that cause temporary discomfort. Water cannons and sonic disruptors offer area effect capabilities that can control large crowds while minimizing the risk of serious injury to participants. Escalation protocols govern the progression from non-lethal to lethal force during crowd control operations, ensuring that arbitrators respond appropriately to changing threat levels while maintaining legal compliance with imperial regulations governing the use of force against civilian populations. These protocols specify conditions that justify different levels of force, from verbal warnings and non-lethal weapons to live ammunition and heavy weapons. The decision to escalate force levels typically requires authorization from senior officers who can assess the broader implications of increased violence on local political stability. Crowd psychology analysis enables arbitrators to identify key individuals whose actions influence crowd behavior, allowing targeted intervention that can prevent minor disturbances from escalating into major riots. Trained observers learn to recognize the behavioral patterns and communication methods used by agitators to incite crowd violence, while identifying potential allies among crowd members who might assist in peaceful resolution of conflicts. This analysis also helps predict crowd movement patterns and likely targets of crowd violence, enabling proactive deployment of resources to protect critical facilities and personnel. The coordination between Arbites units and other Imperial forces during major civil unrest requires clear command structures and communication protocols that prevent confusion while maximizing the effectiveness of combined operations. Imperial Guard units provide heavy weapons support and area security capabilities that exceed Arbites' resources, while Space Marine forces offer elite combat capabilities for situations involving organized resistance or suspected chaos influence. The integration of these different forces requires careful planning to ensure that their diverse capabilities complement rather than interfere with each other. Joint operations with the Astra Militarum typically involve Arbites forces taking the lead in crowd control and law enforcement activities, while Guard units provide perimeter security and heavy weapons support. Guard commanders possess extensive experience in large-scale military operations, but may lack the specialized training necessary for effective crowd control in urban environments. Arbites officers often serve as advisors during joint operations, providing expertise in civilian psychology and legal constraints that military commanders might not fully understand. The involvement of Space Marine forces in civil unrest situations remains rare due to their specialized role in combating the most serious threats to Imperial security. When Space Marines deploy for crowd control operations, their presence typically indicates suspected chaos corruption or alien infiltration that poses threats beyond the capabilities of conventional law enforcement. The psychological impact of Space Marine deployment often resolves civil unrest immediately, as civilian populations recognize that their presence indicates extremely serious circumstances that demand immediate compliance with Imperial authority. Coordination with Inquisition forces presents unique challenges due to the secretive nature of Inquisition operations and the broad authority wielded by Inquisitors in pursuit of their investigations. Inquisition requests for Arbites support typically involve situations where local law enforcement capabilities prove inadequate for addressing suspected heretical activities or alien infiltration. These operations often require Arbites personnel to operate under unusual circumstances with limited information about objectives and methods, while maintaining the security protocols necessary to protect sensitive Inquisition activities. The intelligence gathering networks maintained by the Adeptus Arbites extend throughout Imperial society, providing early warning of criminal activities and seditious movements that might threaten Imperial stability. These networks include both formal relationships with other Imperial institutions and informal contacts among civilian populations who provide information about suspicious activities in their communities. The effectiveness of intelligence networks depends on careful cultivation of sources and rigorous analysis of collected information to identify genuine threats among the vast amount of routine intelligence gathered daily. Cooperation with local law enforcement agencies provides the Adeptus Arbites with detailed knowledge of local criminal activities and social conditions that might indicate emerging threats to Imperial authority. Local police forces possess intimate knowledge of their communities and ongoing criminal investigations that can provide valuable context for Imperial law enforcement activities. However, this cooperation requires careful assessment of local agency reliability and security, as corrupt or incompetent local authorities can compromise Imperial operations while providing criminals with advance warning of enforcement activities. Information sharing protocols govern the exchange of intelligence between different Imperial agencies, ensuring that sensitive information receives appropriate protection while enabling effective coordination of enforcement activities. These protocols specify which types of information can be shared with different agencies and the security measures required for protecting classified intelligence. Regular intelligence briefings provide updates on emerging threats and criminal trends that might affect multiple jurisdictions, while emergency communication procedures enable rapid sharing of time-sensitive information during crisis situations. The analysis of collected intelligence requires sophisticated data processing capabilities and trained personnel who can identify patterns and connections among seemingly unrelated criminal activities. Data correlation systems can identify relationships between different criminal organizations, track the movement of individuals across multiple worlds, and predict likely targets for future criminal activities. This analysis often reveals the scope and complexity of criminal networks that would be invisible to individual investigations, enabling coordinated enforcement actions that can disrupt entire criminal organizations rather than simply arresting individual participants. The pacification of Necromunda stands as one of the most complex and enduring operations in Adeptus Arbites history, demonstrating the challenges inherent in maintaining imperial law within the sprawling underhive networks that characterize many hive worlds throughout the Imperium. Necromunda's unique position as a major manufacturing center for the Imperium created conditions that fostered extensive criminal enterprises, from illegal weapons manufacturing to massive smuggling operations that exploited the world's position along crucial trade routes. The Arbites' presence on Necromunda evolved from routine law enforcement to sustained counter-insurgency operations as criminal organizations developed increasingly sophisticated capabilities that threatened not merely local order, but the world's ability to meet its imperial obligations. The underhive criminal networks on Necromunda operated with a level of organization and resources that exceeded typical planetary crime syndicates, exploiting the vast industrial infrastructure and complex social hierarchies that characterized hive world society. These organizations controlled entire sections of the underhive through a combination of violence, economic manipulation, and corruption of local authorities. The criminal leadership included former Imperial Guard veterans, rogue tech adepts, and displaced nobles who possessed both the skills and connections necessary to operate sophisticated criminal enterprises across multiple hive levels. Arbites' operations in the Necromunda underhive required specialized equipment and tactics adapted to the unique environment of densely packed industrial complexes, abandoned manufacturing facilities, and labyrinthine tunnel systems that extended for kilometers beneath the hive spires. Standard riot suppression equipment proved inadequate for operations in confined spaces where criminals possessed detailed knowledge of local terrain and could exploit environmental hazards to their advantage. Arbitrators deployed specialized breaching equipment designed for industrial environments, including plasma cutters capable of penetrating reinforced blast doors and atmospheric processors that could neutralize chemical hazards commonly found in abandoned manufacturing areas. The investigation of underhive criminal networks revealed connections that extended far beyond Necromunda itself, involving smuggling operations that transported illegal goods throughout the sector and corruption schemes that reached into the highest levels of planetary government. Criminal organizations exploited Necromunda's manufacturing capabilities to produce unauthorized weapons and equipment that supplied seditious movements on dozens of other worlds, while their financial networks laundered profits through legitimate commercial enterprises that provided cover for their illegal activities. The scope of these operations required coordination between multiple Arbites commands and other Imperial agencies, including the Imperial Navy for interdiction of smuggling vessels and the Adeptus Mechanicus for technical analysis of illegal manufacturing processes. Counterintelligence operations became crucial components of the Necromunda campaign as criminal organizations demonstrated sophisticated surveillance capabilities and advanced warning systems that compromised conventional law enforcement techniques. Criminal networks employed former Imperial intelligence personnel who provided training in counter-surveillance methods and operational security that rivaled those used by legitimate Imperial agencies. The Arbites' response included the deployment of specialized investigation teams trained in deep cover operations, using false identities and extended infiltration missions to penetrate criminal organizations from within. The development of informant networks within the underhive population required careful consideration of local social dynamics and the complex loyalties that characterized hive world society. Many underhive residents maintained ambivalent relationships with both criminal organizations and Imperial authorities, viewing both as external forces that imposed their will on local communities. Successful informant recruitment focused on individuals whose personal experiences with criminal violence motivated them to cooperate with imperial law enforcement, while providing protection and relocation services for informants whose safety became compromised through their cooperation. The suppression of the Reign of Blood represents the Adeptus Arbites' most significant contribution to defending imperial institutions against internal corruption and abuse of power. When High Lord Goge Vander consolidated control over both the administratum and the ecclesiarchy during the 36th millennium, his increasingly tyrannical rule created conditions that threatened the fundamental stability of imperial governance. The Arbites found themselves in the unique position of being one of the few imperial institutions with both the legal authority and operational independence necessary to investigate and oppose Vander's excesses while maintaining their loyalty to the emperor and imperial law. Arbites' involvement in the crisis began with routine investigations into reports of excessive taxation and unauthorized military recruitment in sectors under Vander's direct control. These investigations revealed systematic violations of imperial law that extended far beyond simple administrative incompetence to encompass deliberate subversion of established legal procedures and constitutional limitations on High Lord authority. Arbites marshals documented evidence of illegal executions, unauthorized seizure of private property, and the use of ecclesiarchy forces for secular law enforcement in violation of the careful separation of powers that characterized imperial governance. The challenge facing Arbites' commanders during this period involved distinguishing between lawful orders issued through proper imperial channels and illegal commands that exceeded Vander's legitimate authority. The High Lord's control over significant portions of the imperial bureaucracy enabled him to issue orders that appeared legitimate while actually violating fundamental principles of imperial law. Arbites' legal scholars worked extensively with loyalist elements within the administratum and other imperial institutions to establish clear guidelines for identifying illegal orders and developing procedures for lawful resistance to unauthorized commands. Coordination with loyalist forces required careful assessment of the reliability and capabilities of potential allies while maintaining operational security that prevented Vander's agents from discovering the scope of resistance activities. The Arbites established secure communication networks with Space Marine chapters, Imperial Guard regiments, and Adeptus Mechanicus forge worlds that remained loyal to the Emperor rather than to Vander personally. These networks enabled the coordination of intelligence gathering and resource sharing that proved crucial for sustaining resistance operations during the extended period of Vander's rule. The Arbites' role in supporting Sebastian Thor's rebellion involved both direct military support and crucial intelligence operations that identified Vander's key supporters and vulnerable points in his power structure. Arbites' investigation teams infiltrated Vander's administrative apparatus, gathering evidence of corruption and illegal activities that could be used to turn potential supporters against the High Lord. This intelligence proved particularly valuable in identifying military commanders and ecclesiarchy officials whose loyalty to Vander stemmed from coercion rather than genuine support, enabling targeted approaches that brought these individuals into the Loyalist coalition. Combat operations during the Reign of Blood required Arbites' forces to engage in sustained military actions that exceeded their normal law enforcement role, while maintaining their identity as defenders of imperial law rather than simple rebels against established authority. Arbites' fortress precincts served as rallying points for loyalist forces and secure bases for operations against Vander's supporters. The defensive capabilities of these installations proved crucial during siege operations, while their communication arrays enabled coordination between loyalist forces across multiple sectors. The legal framework established during the Reign of Blood crisis created important precedents for future Arbites operations involving corruption within imperial institutions. The principle that loyalty to the emperor superseded obedience to individual imperial officials, regardless of their rank or position, became a fundamental component of Arbites' training and operational doctrine. This principle provided clear guidance for situations where imperial officials issued orders that conflicted with imperial law or the broader interests of the Imperium, while establishing procedures for lawful resistance that maintained institutional stability. Counterinsurgency operations during the Age of Apostasy required the Adeptus Arbites to adapt their traditional law enforcement methods to address widespread civil unrest and religious conflict that threatened imperial stability across hundreds of worlds. The religious upheavals that characterized this period created conditions where conventional criminal organizations merged with religious movements to create hybrid threats that combined ideological motivation with sophisticated operational capabilities. These insurgent groups exploited religious tensions and social grievances to build popular support while using criminal methods to finance their operations and acquire weapons and equipment. The investigation of religious insurgencies required specialized knowledge of theological disputes and ecclesiarchy doctrine that exceeded the normal training provided to Arbites personnel. Investigation teams included ecclesiarchy advisors and theological experts who could distinguish between legitimate religious differences and heretical beliefs that posed genuine threats to imperial security. This expertise proved crucial for developing appropriate responses that addressed security concerns without unnecessarily inflaming religious tensions or creating martyrs whose deaths might inspire additional resistance. Intelligence gathering operations during counterinsurgency campaigns faced unique challenges due to the close-knit nature of religious communities and the ideological commitment that motivated insurgent supporters. Traditional informant recruitment methods proved less effective against individuals whose cooperation with imperial authorities conflicted with deeply held religious beliefs, while the communal nature of many religious groups made infiltration operations extremely difficult. Arbites personnel developed specialized approaches that exploited theological disagreements within insurgent movements and identified individuals whose religious convictions actually supported cooperation with legitimate imperial authority. The protection of loyal imperial institutions during the Age of Apostasy required extensive coordination between Arbites forces and other imperial agencies to ensure continuity of essential government functions while addressing security threats. Arbites units provided security for administratum facilities, protected loyal ecclesiarchy officials from assassination attempts, and maintained communication links between isolated imperial installations. These protective operations often required sustained deployments in hostile environments where Arbites personnel faced constant threats from insurgent forces while maintaining the professional standards expected of imperial law enforcement. Urban warfare tactics developed during counterinsurgency operations emphasized the protection of civilian populations while eliminating insurgent capabilities, recognizing that excessive collateral damage could drive neutral populations towards supporting insurgent movements. Arbites forces employed precision weapons and surgical strike techniques that minimized destruction of civilian infrastructure while maximizing the psychological impact on insurgent organizations. These tactics required extensive training in urban combat techniques and careful coordination with local authorities to ensure that enforcement operations maintained public support for imperial rule. Anti-smuggling campaigns along major trade routes represent ongoing operations that demonstrate the Adeptus Arbites' role in maintaining the economic foundations of imperial power through enforcement of trade regulations and taxation requirements. The vast scale of interplanetary commerce creates numerous opportunities for criminal organizations to exploit bureaucratic gaps and jurisdictional confusion while generating enormous profits that fund other illegal activities. Arbites' anti-smuggling operations require sophisticated intelligence capabilities and specialized equipment designed to detect contraband among the millions of legitimate cargo shipments that traverse imperial space daily. The investigation of smuggling networks often reveals connections between seemingly legitimate commercial enterprises and criminal organizations that exploit established business relationships to move illegal goods across planetary boundaries. These investigations require detailed analysis of shipping records, financial transactions, and commercial relationships that span multiple worlds and involve complex corporate structures designed to obscure criminal activities. Arbites investigation teams work closely with administratum tax assessors and commercial regulators to identify suspicious patterns in trade data that might indicate smuggling operations. Enforcement operations against smuggling rings require coordination with Imperial Navy forces that provide the space-based assets necessary for intercepting smuggling vessels and conducting searches of commercial spacecraft. Joint operations between Arbites and Navy personnel combine law enforcement expertise with naval capabilities to create effective interdiction capabilities that can address smuggling operations across entire sectors. These operations often involve extended surveillance missions that track suspected smuggling vessels across multiple star systems while gathering evidence necessary for successful prosecutions. The enforcement of imperial taxation and tithe collection represents one of the most politically sensitive aspects of Arbites operations, as these activities directly affect planetary governments and commercial enterprises that possess significant political influence. Tax enforcement operations require careful coordination with administratum assessors who determine appropriate tax obligations while providing the legal framework necessary for enforcement actions. Arbites personnel must distinguish between simple administrative errors and deliberate tax evasion while considering the broader political implications of enforcement decisions. Investigation of tax evasion schemes often reveals sophisticated financial arrangements designed to conceal assets and income from imperial assessors through complex corporate structures and off-world banking arrangements. These investigations require specialized training in financial analysis and forensic accounting techniques that can trace money flows through multiple jurisdictions and identify hidden assets that should be subject to imperial taxation. The complexity of modern commercial arrangements creates numerous opportunities for both innocent mistakes and deliberate evasion, requiring careful analysis to determine appropriate enforcement responses. Enforcement actions against tax evaders range from administrative penalties and asset seizures to criminal prosecutions that can result in imprisonment or execution, depending on the scope and impact of the violations. The most serious cases involve planetary governors or major commercial enterprises whose tax evasion significantly reduces imperial revenue and threatens the funding necessary for military operations and administrative functions. These cases require approval from senior Arbites authorities and careful coordination with other imperial agencies to ensure that enforcement actions do not inadvertently disrupt essential economic or administrative functions. The development of specialized investigation techniques for financial crimes has created new capabilities that enable Arbites personnel to address increasingly sophisticated criminal schemes that exploit modern commercial and financial systems. Electronic surveillance of financial transactions provides real-time monitoring of suspicious activities, while data analysis systems can identify patterns in financial behavior that indicate potential criminal activity. These capabilities require ongoing training and equipment updates to keep pace with evolving criminal methods and technological developments in commercial and financial systems. The operational effectiveness of the Adeptus Arbites depends fundamentally on their ability to coordinate with other imperial institutions while maintaining their independence and specialized focus on law enforcement. This delicate balance requires constant negotiation of jurisdictional boundaries, resource sharing agreements, and operational protocols that enable effective cooperation without compromising the unique capabilities that each organization brings to imperial governance. The complexity of these relationships reflects the broader challenges of governing a galaxy-spanning empire where multiple institutions must work together despite having different priorities, methods, and organizational cultures. The relationship between the Adeptus Arbites and the Inquisition represents one of the most complex and consequential partnerships within the imperial hierarchy, as both organizations possess broad investigative authorities that frequently overlap in cases involving heresy, corruption, and threats to imperial security. Inquisitors operate with virtually unlimited authority to investigate any threat to the Imperium, while arbitrators maintain specific responsibility for enforcing imperial law and investigating crimes that fall under their jurisdiction. This division of responsibilities creates potential conflicts when investigations cross organizational boundaries or when different approaches to the same problem produce conflicting recommendations. Cooperation between Arbites and Inquisition forces typically begins when routine law enforcement investigations uncover evidence of heretical activity or corruption that exceeds normal criminal behavior. Arbitrators who discover signs of chaos, corruption, alien infiltration, or systematic heresy within imperial institutions have standing orders to notify the nearest Inquisition representative while securing the investigation site and preventing further contamination. These initial notifications often lead to joint operations where Arbites personnel provide local knowledge and law enforcement expertise, while Inquisition agents contribute specialized capabilities for dealing with supernatural threats. The jurisdictional boundaries between Arbites and Inquisition operations require careful negotiation in each specific case, as the broad authority granted to Inquisitors can potentially override normal legal procedures, while Arbites' responsibilities for maintaining public order and legal compliance continue regardless of Inquisition involvement. Experienced arbitrators learn to recognize when their investigations have uncovered matters that properly belong under Inquisition jurisdiction, while understanding that their own legal obligations continue even when working under Inquisition direction. This balance requires detailed knowledge of both imperial law and Inquisition procedures, along with the diplomatic skills necessary to coordinate effectively with Inquisition personnel who may have very different approaches to investigation and enforcement. Joint investigation protocols establish procedures for sharing evidence and coordinating activities when both organizations have legitimate interests in the same case. These protocols specify which types of evidence must be shared immediately, which require special handling due to security concerns, and which remain under the exclusive control of the originating organization. The classification levels and security procedures governing Inquisition operations often exceed those used by normal Arbites activities, requiring special training for arbitrators who work regularly with Inquisition forces and additional security measures for protecting sensitive information. Resource sharing agreements between the Arbites and Inquisition enable both organizations to leverage their respective capabilities more effectively, while avoiding duplication of effort and potential conflicts over limited resources. Inquisitors frequently requisition Arbites personnel for operations requiring local law enforcement expertise, crowd control capabilities, or detailed knowledge of imperial legal procedures. These requisitions typically involve specific individuals or small teams rather than large-scale deployments, as Inquisition operations emphasize secrecy and precision rather than the sustained enforcement campaigns that characterize normal Arbites activities. The Arbites provide crucial support during Inquisition investigations that require interaction with civilian populations or coordination with local imperial authorities. Arbitrators possess extensive training in civilian psychology and legal procedures that enable them to gather information and maintain public order without creating the fear and suspicion that often accompanies direct Inquisition involvement. This capability proves particularly valuable during investigations involving suspected corruption within planetary governments or commercial enterprises, where heavy-handed approaches might compromise ongoing operations or create political complications that interfere with broader imperial objectives. Information sharing between Arbites and Inquisition organizations follows strict protocols designed to protect sensitive intelligence while enabling effective coordination of enforcement activities. Arbitrators receive regular briefings on emerging threats and investigation priorities that might affect their areas of responsibility, while providing detailed reports on criminal activities and social conditions that could indicate developing security problems. These exchanges enable both organizations to identify potential threats earlier and coordinate responses more effectively than either could achieve operating independently. The support role provided by the Adeptus Arbites during Astra Militarum operations reflects the complementary nature of law enforcement and military capabilities in maintaining imperial control over civilian populations. Imperial Guard forces excel at large-scale military operations and conventional warfare, but often lack the specialized training and equipment necessary for effective crowd control, civilian administration, and law enforcement in occupied territories. Arbites personnel provide these capabilities while benefiting from military protection and logistical support that enables them to operate in hostile environments that would overwhelm purely civilian law enforcement capabilities. Planetary pacification campaigns represent the most common form of cooperation between Arbites and Astra Militarum forces, as these operations require both military capabilities to defeat organized resistance and law enforcement expertise to establish stable governance in liberated territories. The initial phases of pacification campaigns typically involve conventional military operations led by Guard commanders, with Arbites personnel providing intelligence about local conditions and potential security threats while preparing for the transition to civilian administration. This preparation includes identifying local leaders who might cooperate with imperial authorities, assessing the condition of existing administrative infrastructure, and developing plans for establishing law enforcement capabilities in areas previously controlled by hostile forces. The transition from military occupation to civilian administration requires careful coordination between Guard and Arbites commanders to ensure continuity of security while establishing the legal framework necessary for long-term imperial control. Arbites personnel assume responsibility for investigating crimes committed during the occupation period, establishing courts for trying local criminals and collaborators, and training local law enforcement personnel in imperial legal procedures. Guard forces typically maintain responsibility for external security and protection against organized military threats, while gradually reducing their involvement in routine law enforcement activities as Arbites capabilities develop. Joint operations during active military campaigns require Arbites and Guard forces to coordinate their activities while maintaining their distinct roles and capabilities. Arbitrators provide expertise in civilian psychology and urban warfare that proves valuable during operations in populated areas, while Guard forces offer heavy weapons support and area security capabilities that exceed normal law enforcement resources. The integration of these different capabilities requires clear command structures and communication protocols that prevent confusion while maximizing the effectiveness of combined operations. Intelligence sharing between Arbites and Astra Militarum organizations enables both institutions to leverage their respective information gathering capabilities more effectively. Arbitrators possess detailed knowledge of local criminal networks and social conditions that can provide valuable intelligence about potential security threats and sources of resistance to imperial rule. Guard intelligence officers contribute strategic assessments and military intelligence that help Arbites personnel understand the broader context of local security situations and prepare for potential escalation of violence beyond normal law enforcement capabilities. The relationship between the Adeptus Arbites and the ecclesiarchy involves complex interactions around the enforcement of religious orthodoxy and the suppression of heretical practices that threaten imperial spiritual unity. Both organizations share responsibility for maintaining imperial religious standards, though their approaches and authorities differ significantly in ways that require careful coordination to avoid conflicts and ensure effective coverage of all aspects of religious enforcement. The ecclesiarchy possesses theological expertise and spiritual authority that enables them to identify and address religious deviations, while the Arbites provide legal framework and enforcement capabilities necessary for prosecuting heretical activities under imperial law. Cooperation in enforcing religious orthodoxy typically begins when ecclesiarchy officials identify religious practices or beliefs that deviate from approved imperial doctrine in ways that might constitute heretical behavior. These identifications can range from subtle theological errors in local religious instruction to overt worship of prohibited entities or adoption of alien religious concepts. Ecclesiarchy representatives provide theological analysis and spiritual assessment of suspected heretical activities, while Arbites personnel conduct legal investigations to determine whether specific actions constitute crimes under imperial law and gather evidence necessary for successful prosecutions. The investigation of heretical cults requires extensive coordination between ecclesiarchy and Arbites personnel, as these organizations often employ sophisticated methods to conceal their activities while spreading their corruption through seemingly innocent religious and social gatherings. Ecclesiarchy experts provide guidance on recognizing the subtle signs of heretical influence and understanding the theological implications of various cult practices, while arbitrators contribute investigative techniques and legal expertise necessary for building prosecutable cases against cult members and leaders. Joint enforcement operations against heretical movements combine ecclesiarchy spiritual authority with Arbites law enforcement capabilities to create comprehensive responses that address both the immediate security threats posed by heretical activities and the longer-term spiritual contamination that affects exposed populations. Ecclesiarchy personnel conduct purification rituals and provide spiritual counseling for individuals who have been exposed to heretical influence, while arbitrators handle the arrest and prosecution of cult members and the seizure of heretical materials and contraband items used in cult activities. The suppression of unauthorized religious practices requires careful distinction between innocent deviations from standard religious observance and dangerous heretical activities that pose genuine threats to imperial spiritual unity. Local religious traditions and cultural variations in religious expression create complex situations where practices that appear heretical might actually represent legitimate adaptations of imperial religious doctrine to local conditions. Ecclesiarchy theologians provide expertise in making these distinctions, while Arbites legal scholars ensure that enforcement actions comply with imperial law and established precedents for religious freedom within approved boundaries. Coordination with the administratum represents one of the most extensive and routine aspects of Arbites operations, as the vast bureaucratic machinery of imperial governance generates the regulations, assessments, and administrative requirements that form the foundation of much Arbites enforcement activity. The administratum's role in calculating tax obligations, managing resource allocations, and maintaining administrative records provides the legal and factual foundation for many Arbites investigations, while Arbites enforcement capabilities ensure compliance with administratum directives and protect administratum personnel from corruption and interference. Tax collection enforcement represents the most visible aspect of Arbites administratum cooperation, as the complex calculations and assessments performed by administratum adepts require enforcement mechanisms that only the Arbites can provide. Administratum tax assessors determine the appropriate obligations for individual worlds and commercial enterprises based on detailed analysis of production capabilities, economic conditions, and historical performance data. Arbites personnel receive these assessments and conduct investigations to verify compliance, identify potential evasion schemes, and pursue enforcement actions against entities that fail to meet their obligations. The investigation of tax evasion cases requires extensive cooperation between administratum analysts and Arbites investigators, as modern tax evasion schemes often involve sophisticated financial arrangements and complex corporate structures that require specialized expertise to understand and prosecute effectively. Administratum personnel provide detailed analysis of financial records and commercial relationships that might indicate evasion activities, while arbitrators contribute investigative techniques and legal expertise necessary for gathering evidence and building prosecutable cases under imperial law. Census operations conducted jointly by Administratum and Arbites personnel ensure accurate population counts and demographic data, while identifying individuals who attempt to avoid imperial obligations through false identities or unauthorized movement between worlds. These operations require careful coordination between administrative data collection procedures and law enforcement techniques for verifying individual identities and detecting fraudulent documentation. The accuracy of census data affects everything from military recruitment quotas to resource allocation decisions, making the enforcement aspects of census operations crucial for effective imperial governance. Bureaucratic enforcement activities encompass a wide range of operations designed to ensure compliance with imperial administrative procedures and protect the integrity of administrative systems from corruption and interference. Arbites personnel investigate reports of corruption within Administratum facilities, protect administrative personnel from intimidation or bribery attempts, and ensure that administrative decisions receive proper implementation at the local level. These activities require detailed knowledge of administrative procedures and the ability to distinguish between innocent administrative errors and deliberate violations of established protocols. The protection of Administratum personnel and facilities represents an ongoing security responsibility that requires Arbites forces to maintain awareness of potential threats while providing appropriate protective measures without interfering with normal administrative operations. Administratum facilities often contain sensitive information about imperial resources, military capabilities, and strategic planning that makes them attractive targets for enemy intelligence operations and criminal organizations seeking to exploit administrative weaknesses for illegal purposes. Coordination protocols between Arbites and Administratum organizations establish procedures for requesting enforcement support, sharing information about potential violations, and coordinating responses to administrative emergencies that might affect multiple imperial institutions. These protocols specify which types of administrative violations require immediate Arbites attention, which can be handled through normal administrative procedures, and which need coordination with other imperial agencies depending on their scope and potential impact on imperial operations. The complexity of inter-organizational relationships within the imperial hierarchy requires Arbites personnel to maintain detailed knowledge of the capabilities, limitations, and procedures used by other imperial institutions, while developing the diplomatic and coordination skills necessary for effective cooperation. This knowledge extends beyond simple awareness of organizational structures to encompass understanding of the political dynamics, resource constraints, and operational priorities that influence how different institutions approach their responsibilities and interact with other imperial agencies. Training programs for Arbites personnel include extensive education in inter-organizational cooperation, with rotational assignments that provide direct experience working with other imperial institutions and exposure to their operational methods and organizational cultures. These assignments enable arbitrators to develop professional relationships and practical knowledge that prove invaluable during future joint operations, while ensuring that Arbites personnel understand the broader context within which their law enforcement activities take place. The rigorous selection process for the Adeptus Arbites begins within the hallowed halls of the Schola Progenium, where orphaned children of imperial servants undergo intensive education and indoctrination designed to produce unwavering servants of the Emperor's will. These institutions, scattered across thousands of worlds throughout the Imperium, serve as the primary recruitment source for the Adeptus Arbites, carefully identifying candidates who possess the unique combination of intellectual capability, physical prowess, and moral fortitude necessary for effective law enforcement across the galaxy's diverse and often hostile environments. The identification of potential Arbites candidates occurs during the final years of Schola Progenium education, when instructors conduct comprehensive evaluations of students who have demonstrated exceptional performance in relevant academic and practical subjects. These assessments focus particularly on students who excel in imperial history, legal studies, and tactical analysis, while maintaining exemplary disciplinary records and showing natural leadership abilities among their peers. The evaluation process extends beyond simple academic achievement to encompass psychological testing that measures emotional stability, resistance to corruption, and the capacity to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure. Physical screening procedures ensure that candidates possess the bodily capabilities necessary to survive the demanding training regimen and operational requirements that characterize Arbites service. These examinations include endurance testing that simulates the prolonged stress of extended enforcement operations, combat assessments that evaluate weapons proficiency and hand-to-hand fighting skills, and medical screening that identifies any genetic or physiological factors that might compromise performance in hostile environments. Candidates must demonstrate proficiency with standard Imperial weapons, particularly the combat shotgun that serves as the primary armament for arbitrators, while showing adaptability to different combat scenarios and environmental conditions. Psychological evaluation represents perhaps the most crucial component of the selection process, as the nature of Arbites' duties requires individuals capable of maintaining absolute loyalty to Imperial law while exercising significant discretionary authority in complex situations. Trained psychologists conduct extensive interviews and testing designed to identify candidates with the mental resilience necessary to resist corruption, the moral clarity required to distinguish between justice and vengeance, and the emotional stability needed to function effectively in the face of constant exposure to criminal behavior and social decay. These evaluations pay particular attention to identifying individuals whose personal experiences or psychological makeup might make them susceptible to the various forms of corruption encountered during law enforcement operations. The assessment of moral character involves detailed examination of candidates' responses to ethical dilemmas and their understanding of the principles underlying imperial law and justice. Instructors present hypothetical scenarios that test candidates' ability to balance competing interests while maintaining focus on their primary obligation to enforce imperial law. These scenarios often involve situations where local customs conflict with imperial regulations, where enforcement actions might create political complications, or where personal relationships might influence professional decisions. Successful candidates demonstrate consistent adherence to imperial principles while showing the flexibility necessary to adapt their approaches to different circumstances without compromising their fundamental obligations. Academic preparation for Arbites service emphasizes comprehensive understanding of imperial law, administrative procedures, and the complex relationships between different imperial institutions that candidates will encounter throughout their careers. Students receive intensive instruction in the Lex Imperialis, learning not merely the specific provisions of imperial law, but the underlying principles and historical development that shape legal interpretation and application. This education includes detailed study of legal precedents, case studies from significant Arbites operations, and analysis of complex jurisdictional questions that arise when imperial law intersects with local customs and planetary governance structures. The curriculum includes extensive training in investigation techniques, evidence collection procedures, and interrogation methods that enable future arbitrators to conduct effective criminal investigations across diverse planetary environments. Students learn to operate sophisticated forensic equipment, analyze various types of physical evidence, and conduct interviews with witnesses and suspects from different cultural backgrounds. This training emphasizes the importance of maintaining legal compliance and proper documentation, while adapting investigative approaches to local conditions and available resources. Combat training for prospective arbitrators focuses on the specific tactical situations and weapon systems they will encounter during enforcement operations, rather than general military combat techniques. Students receive intensive instruction in urban warfare tactics, crowd control procedures, and the use of specialized law enforcement equipment, including shock mauls, suppression shields, and non-lethal weapons designed for civilian pacification. This training emphasizes precision and restraint, teaching candidates to employ appropriate levels of force while minimizing collateral damage and maintaining public support for imperial authority. The physical conditioning program transforms candidates into formidable law enforcement officers, capable of operating effectively in the harsh environments and dangerous situations that characterize Arbites operations throughout the galaxy. This conditioning includes strength training, designed to enable prolonged wear of heavy carapace armor, endurance development that allows sustained operations in hostile environments, and agility training that improves performance in urban combat situations. Candidates undergo exposure to various atmospheric conditions, gravitational variations, and environmental hazards they might encounter on different worlds, developing the physical adaptability necessary for effective service across diverse planetary environments. Mental conditioning procedures prepare candidates for the psychological stresses and moral challenges inherent in law enforcement work, while building the emotional resilience necessary to maintain effectiveness despite constant exposure to criminal behavior and social corruption. These procedures include meditation techniques derived from imperial religious practices, stress management training that enables continued function under extreme pressure, and psychological preparation for making life and death decisions in situations where hesitation might result in civilian casualties or mission failure. The conditioning emphasizes the development of unwavering loyalty to imperial law and the emperor's will, creating mental frameworks that enable candidates to resist corruption and maintain moral clarity regardless of external pressures. Specialized instruction in imperial jurisprudence provides candidates with detailed knowledge of legal procedures, courtroom protocols, and the complex relationship between imperial law and local planetary governance that they will navigate throughout their careers. This instruction covers everything from basic arrest procedures and evidence handling requirements to complex constitutional questions involving the relationship between imperial authority and planetary sovereignty. Candidates learn to conduct legal research using the vast archives maintained in fortress precincts, interpret legal precedents in novel situations, and prepare comprehensive case files that meet the exacting standards required for successful prosecutions under imperial law. The study of criminal psychology enables future arbitrators to understand the motivations and methods used by different types of criminals, from individual offenders driven by personal circumstances to sophisticated criminal organizations that operate across multiple star systems. This education includes analysis of case studies from significant Arbites investigations, examination of criminal behavior patterns that might indicate specific types of illegal activity, and training in recognizing the subtle signs of corruption that characterize various forms of heretical influence. Candidates learn to distinguish between different categories of criminal behavior and select appropriate investigative and enforcement approaches for each type of case. Administrative training prepares candidates for the extensive documentation and coordination requirements that characterize modern law enforcement operations within the imperial bureaucracy. Future arbitrators learn to navigate complex administrative procedures, maintain detailed records of their activities and decisions, and coordinate effectively with other imperial institutions whose cooperation proves essential for successful enforcement operations. This training includes instruction in communication protocols, resource requisition procedures, and the political considerations that influence how different imperial organizations approach their responsibilities and interact with law enforcement agencies. The indoctrination process reinforces candidates' loyalty to the emperor and imperial law while building the psychological frameworks necessary to resist the various forms of corruption they will encounter during their service. This indoctrination combines religious instruction in imperial doctrine with practical training in recognizing and resisting chaos influence, alien manipulation, and other threats to spiritual and moral integrity. Candidates undergo extensive exposure to imperial history and the philosophical foundations of imperial law, developing deep understanding of the principles that guide their service and the broader context within which their individual actions contribute to imperial security and prosperity. Practical field exercises provide candidates with hands-on experience in law enforcement procedures under controlled conditions that simulate the challenges they will face during actual operations. These exercises include mock investigations, where candidates must gather evidence and identify perpetrators, crowd control scenarios that test their ability to maintain order without excessive force, and complex legal situations that require careful analysis of jurisdictional boundaries and appropriate enforcement responses. The exercises emphasize teamwork and coordination, while testing individual decision-making capabilities and adherence to proper procedures under stress. The evaluation of candidates during practical exercises focuses on their ability to apply theoretical knowledge to real-world situations while maintaining the professional standards and legal compliance expected of imperial law enforcement officers. Instructors assess candidates' tactical decision-making, their ability to work effectively with teammates, and their adherence to proper procedures even when facing time pressure or unexpected complications. These evaluations identify candidates who possess the practical skills and judgment necessary for effective service, while revealing those who might require additional training or prove unsuitable for Arbites service. Advanced training modules prepare selected candidates for specialized roles within the Arbites hierarchy, including investigation specialists, riot suppression experts, and officers destined for command positions. These modules provide intensive instruction in specific areas of expertise while maintaining the broad knowledge base that enables all arbitrators to function effectively in diverse operational situations. Candidates selected for investigation specialization receive additional training in forensic analysis, surveillance techniques, and the complex legal procedures required for prosecuting sophisticated criminal organizations. Those destined for riot suppression roles undergo extensive training in crowd psychology, non-lethal weapon systems, and the coordination procedures necessary for effective crowd control operations. The final assessment phase determines which candidates receive assignment to active Arbites units and their initial postings within the organization's hierarchy. This assessment combines performance evaluations from all phases of training with psychological profiles and aptitude testing that identifies the most appropriate roles for each individual. Successful candidates receive their first assignments as chasteners under the supervision of experienced arbitrators, beginning their practical service while continuing to develop the skills and judgment necessary for advancement within the organization. The ongoing development of Arbites personnel continues throughout their careers through regular training updates, specialized courses, and rotational assignments that expose officers to different aspects of law enforcement operations. These programs ensure that arbitrators maintain current knowledge of evolving criminal methods, new technologies, and changes in imperial law or policy that affect their operational procedures. Advanced training opportunities enable promising officers to develop the specialized expertise necessary for promotion to senior positions, while maintaining the broad competence expected of all Arbites personnel. The Adeptus Arbites stands as one of the most enduring and influential institutions within the Imperium of Man, their black armored presence serving as both shield and sword in the eternal struggle to maintain order across 1,000,000 worlds. Throughout 10 millennia of service, the organization has evolved from the Emperor's original vision of unified law enforcement into a complex institution that shapes imperial society at every level, from the sprawling hive cities of core worlds to the frontier settlements at the galaxy's edge. Their influence extends far beyond simple crime prevention, touching every aspect of imperial life through their role as guardians of the legal framework that binds human civilization together. The stability provided by Arbites' enforcement operations creates the foundation upon which imperial society functions, enabling the complex economic, military, and administrative systems that sustain humanity's galactic empire. Without consistent enforcement of imperial law, the vast trade networks that connect distant worlds would collapse under the weight of piracy and fraud, while the taxation systems that fund imperial military forces would crumble as worlds discovered they could ignore their obligations without consequence. The mere presence of fortress precincts on major worlds serves as a constant reminder that imperial authority extends beyond the reach of local corruption and political maneuvering, creating psychological pressure that encourages compliance even when direct enforcement proves impossible. The economic impact of Arbites' operations extends throughout imperial commerce, as their enforcement of trade regulations and taxation requirements ensures the steady flow of resources necessary for imperial military operations and administrative functions. Merchants operating along major trade routes adjust their business practices to comply with imperial regulations, not merely to avoid prosecution, but because consistent enforcement creates predictable conditions that enable long-term planning and investment. The suppression of smuggling operations protects legitimate businesses from unfair competition, while ensuring that imperial taxes and duties generate the revenue necessary to maintain the military forces that protect those same trade routes from external threats. Criminal organizations throughout the galaxy modify their operational methods in response to Arbites' capabilities and procedures, creating an ongoing evolution in criminal tactics that drives corresponding developments in law enforcement techniques. The sophisticated investigation methods employed by Arbites' units force criminal networks to adopt increasingly complex security measures and organizational structures, while the threat of summary execution deters many potential criminals from engaging in activities that might attract imperial attention. This dynamic relationship between law enforcement and criminal innovation creates a constant pressure for improvement in both areas, driving technological and procedural developments that benefit imperial security more broadly. Cultural perceptions of the Adeptus Arbites vary significantly across different segments of imperial society, reflecting the complex relationship between law enforcement authority and civilian populations that characterizes governance throughout the Imperium. Among law-abiding citizens, particularly those in positions of responsibility within imperial institutions, arbitrators represent security and stability, their presence providing reassurance that criminal activities will face appropriate consequences and that imperial law will protect those who fulfill their obligations to the emperor. These positive perceptions create social pressure that encourages cooperation with law enforcement and voluntary compliance with imperial regulations, even in areas where direct enforcement proves difficult. The distinctive appearance of Arbites personnel reinforces their psychological impact on civilian populations, as their black carapace armor and imposing weapons create immediate recognition of imperial authority that transcends local political boundaries and cultural differences. The standardized equipment and procedures used by arbitrators throughout the galaxy create consistent expectations about their capabilities and methods, enabling civilians to understand their role and respond appropriately regardless of planetary location or local circumstances. This consistency proves particularly valuable in areas where local law enforcement agencies lack credibility or effectiveness, as citizens recognize that Arbites' intervention represents genuine imperial commitment to maintaining order. Public ceremonies and trials conducted by the Adeptus Arbites serve important educational functions that reinforce imperial values and legal principles among civilian populations. The formal procedures and ritualistic elements of Arbites courtrooms emphasize the majesty and authority of imperial law, while demonstrating the careful deliberation that characterizes imperial justice. These public displays create opportunities for citizens to observe the practical application of legal principles they encounter in imperial doctrine, while the visible consequences faced by convicted criminals provide powerful deterrent effects that extend far beyond the immediate participants in legal proceedings. The relationship between arbitrators and local populations requires careful management of competing interests and expectations, as law enforcement activities often conflict with local customs and economic interests while serving broader imperial objectives. Experienced arbitrators learn to distinguish between activities that genuinely threaten imperial security and those that simply violate local preferences or economic arrangements, focusing their enforcement efforts on matters that require imperial intervention while allowing local authorities to handle purely local concerns. This selective approach maintains imperial authority while avoiding unnecessary conflicts that might undermine public support for imperial rule. Educational programs conducted by Arbites personnel help civilian populations understand their rights and obligations under imperial law while providing practical guidance for avoiding criminal behavior and cooperating with law enforcement activities. These programs prove particularly valuable in areas where local educational systems lack adequate coverage of imperial legal principles, or where cultural differences create confusion about appropriate behavior under imperial law. The educational role of arbitrators extends beyond formal instruction to include the daily interactions between law enforcement personnel and civilian populations that demonstrate proper procedures and appropriate responses to various situations. The evolution of Arbites enforcement methods throughout the 41st millennium reflects the organization's adaptation to changing threats and technological developments while maintaining their core mission of enforcing imperial law. The increasing prevalence of heretical cults and alien infiltration has driven the development of specialized investigation techniques and equipment designed to detect supernatural threats that conventional criminal investigation methods cannot address effectively. These developments include enhanced psychic screening procedures, improved detection equipment for identifying alien influence, and modified interrogation techniques that can extract information from subjects affected by various forms of corruption. Technological advances in communication and transportation have enabled the Adeptus Arbites to coordinate operations across greater distances while responding more rapidly to emerging threats that span multiple star systems. Improved astropathic communication networks allow real-time coordination between fortress precincts separated by thousands of light years, while advances in spacecraft design enable rapid deployment of specialized investigation teams to locations where local Arbites resources prove inadequate. These technological improvements have transformed the organization from a collection of independent planetary law enforcement agencies into a truly integrated galactic institution capable of addressing threats that transcend local boundaries. The increasing complexity of criminal organizations and their methods has driven corresponding developments in Arbites training and operational procedures, as traditional law enforcement techniques prove insufficient for addressing sophisticated networks that exploit modern technology and imperial bureaucratic complexity. Advanced investigation techniques now include financial analysis capabilities that can trace complex money laundering schemes across multiple worlds, while improved surveillance technology enables monitoring of criminal communications that employ encryption and counter-surveillance measures. These developments require ongoing training programs that ensure Arbites personnel maintain current knowledge of evolving criminal methods and appropriate countermeasures. Counterintelligence capabilities have become increasingly important as criminal organizations and enemy agents develop more sophisticated methods for gathering information about Arbites operations and personnel. The organization has responded by implementing enhanced security procedures for protecting sensitive information, while developing counter-surveillance techniques that can identify and neutralize enemy intelligence operations. These capabilities require specialized training and equipment that enable arbitrators to operate effectively in environments where their activities face constant monitoring and potential interference from hostile forces. The integration of new weapon systems and protective equipment has enhanced Arbites' combat capabilities while maintaining their focus on law enforcement rather than military operations. Improvements in carapace armor design provide better protection against modern weapons, while incorporating advanced communication and sensor systems that improve situational awareness during enforcement operations. New weapon systems offer greater precision and reduced collateral damage potential, enabling arbitrators to operate more effectively in urban environments where civilian casualties might create political complications or undermine public support for imperial authority. Future challenges facing the Adeptus Arbites reflect the broader difficulties confronting the Imperium as it struggles to maintain control over its vast territories while facing increasing threats from external enemies and internal corruption. Resource constraints limit the organization's ability to maintain adequate personnel levels and equipment standards across all Imperial worlds, forcing difficult decisions about where to concentrate limited enforcement capabilities while accepting reduced coverage in less critical areas. These constraints require improved efficiency in operations and better coordination with other Imperial institutions to maximize the effectiveness of available resources. The growing influence of chaos corruption throughout Imperial space creates unprecedented challenges for law enforcement agencies that must address threats operating on spiritual and psychological levels that traditional investigative methods cannot detect or counter effectively. The subtle nature of early chaos corruption makes it extremely difficult to identify until it has already spread throughout communities, while the supernatural capabilities possessed by fully corrupted individuals exceed the capabilities of conventional law enforcement techniques. These challenges require ongoing development of new detection methods and protective procedures that can address supernatural threats while maintaining the legal framework necessary for effective prosecution under Imperial law. Heretical activity has increased significantly throughout the 41st millennium as various chaos cults exploit social tensions and economic hardships to recruit new members and spread their corruption through Imperial society. The sophisticated recruitment and operational methods employed by modern heretical organizations require corresponding improvements in Arbites' counter-cult capabilities, including enhanced training in recognizing subtle signs of heretical influence and improved coordination with ecclesiarchy and inquisition forces that possess specialized expertise in addressing spiritual threats. The investigation and suppression of heretical activities must balance the need for thorough action against the risk of creating martyrs or driving corruption underground, where it becomes even more difficult to detect and counter. The expansion of alien threats throughout Imperial space creates additional challenges as various xenospecies develop more sophisticated methods for infiltrating human society and corrupting Imperial institutions from within. Genestealer cults represent the most obvious example of this trend, but other alien species employ subtler forms of influence that can affect human behavior and decision-making without producing obvious physical changes that conventional detection methods can identify. The development of effective countermeasures against alien infiltration requires ongoing research and development efforts that strain already limited resources while demanding specialized expertise that few Imperial institutions possess. Technological developments among criminal organizations and enemy forces continue to outpace the resources available for developing appropriate countermeasures, creating ongoing challenges for law enforcement agencies that must address increasingly sophisticated threats with limited budgets and personnel. Advanced encryption methods, improved surveillance detection capabilities, and enhanced weapons systems available to criminal organizations require corresponding improvements in Arbites' equipment and training that may exceed available funding and technical expertise. These technological gaps create vulnerabilities that enemy forces can exploit while limiting the effectiveness of traditional law enforcement approaches. The political environment within the Imperium has become increasingly complex as various imperial institutions compete for limited resources while facing pressure to demonstrate their effectiveness in addressing mounting security threats. The Adeptus Arbites must navigate these political challenges while maintaining their independence and focus on law enforcement objectives, avoiding entanglement in broader political conflicts that might compromise their effectiveness or credibility. This political navigation requires diplomatic skills and strategic thinking that extend beyond traditional law enforcement capabilities, while maintaining the organization's core identity and mission focus. As the Imperium enters the closing years of the 41st millennium, the Adeptus Arbites remains an essential institution whose continued effectiveness proves crucial for maintaining the stability and unity that enable human civilization to survive in an increasingly hostile galaxy. Their legacy spans 10,000 years of faithful service to the Emperor's vision of unified law and justice, while their ongoing adaptation to new challenges demonstrates the institutional resilience necessary for continued effectiveness in an ever-changing strategic environment. The black armored arbitrators who patrol imperial worlds carry forward this legacy while facing unprecedented challenges that will test their capabilities and determination in the dark millennium ahead. The enduring impact of the Adeptus Arbites on imperial society extends far beyond their immediate law enforcement functions to encompass their role as guardians of the legal and moral framework that defines human civilization in the 41st millennium. Their unwavering commitment to imperial law and justice provides stability and continuity that enables other imperial institutions to function effectively, while serving as a constant reminder that the emperors will remain supreme throughout human space. In a galaxy where darkness and corruption threaten to overwhelm the light of human civilization, the Adeptus Arbites stands as an eternal bulwark against chaos, ensuring that imperial law endures as long as humanity itself survives among the stars.